Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Pika fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Ash becomes Mewtwo trainer? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It started on the beach, back in Alola, watching the sun slowly sink beyond the horizon. Alolan sunsets sure were beautiful. Even after all these months, Ash still couldn't get over them. The sky, awash with brilliant reds and yellows, the sound of the waves crashing against his ears, the depths of the ocean resounding against the feelings in his chest. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath of the salty air, letting the energy of Alola fill him completely. Pallet would always be home, but Alola was something else. Hey there, Ash. He reopened his eyes and turned to smile at Professor Kukui, wandering across from the path up to the house. Hey Professor. You're home early. I have less to do now that the league is finished. And with school wrapping up, I just have my research left, he explained. I'm still searching for a summer topic. Not going to go with the 4-move phenomenon, he asked, quoting the last project he'd heard the professor going into detail over, but Professor Kukui shook his head. After everything that's happened these last few months, it feels a little pedestrian, he admitted as he stepped up alongside Ash, and they exchanged grins. But I'm not sure I want to study something as exciting as the Tapu or Manalo festival. I think I might talk to some of the kahuna and see what they think. They're really great for a little perspective, Ash said brightly. Talking to Olivia yesterday really helped settle my mind. The professor's smile faded a little, and he looked out and over the sand to where Ash's Pokémon were playing in their individual ways. Incineroar and Melmetal were stretched out on the sand to sleep and make sand angels respectively, with Rowlet snoozing on Incineroar's chest. Pikachu was playing with the lapping shoreline, while Lycanroc was actually out in the water, biting the waves as they came in. They'd spent most of the afternoon training, like always, but Ash hadn't felt like heading inside once they were done. The breeze had caught his attention, and he'd been letting his mind wander after it. Rotom still at Ether Paradise then? The professor asked, more quietly, and Ash nodded. He wasn't sure what had changed the professor's mood, but he could answer simple questions. Aha. I'm pretty sure it's going to take the job. I see. It doesn't want to keep following you, then? Ash grinned again, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, I'm pretty sure it's still going to go out with the Ultra Guardians, so it will still get to see some really cool Ultra Beasts, and... That's not what I asked, Ash. He stopped, and then looked up, but the moment he caught the professor's gaze, Professor Kukui winced and held up a hand. Sorry. That didn't come out like I meant it to. Okay? He hesitated, then smiled and turned away. I guess it's fair, though. The point is, Rotomdex won't be my Pokédex anymore. It's going to follow its dream to become the most advanced Pokédex in the world. I think it'll have a better chance of doing that with Ether Paradise, for sure. Yeah, I guess so, he said, and then paused again, stuffing his hands in his coat pockets. So, what about you, then? You know, there's plenty here for you to do if you wanted to stay. And again, Ash stopped. Now he could guess at the professor's weird mood. If he wanted to stay. Somehow, Professor Kukui already knew that Ash was going to leave. He took a deep breath to keep his voice casual as he asked, like what? Traditionally, champions become leaders of the Pokémon industry for their region, the professor reminded him. They provide advice, protect people and Pokémon, and the kahuna have already mentioned that they'd appreciate any help you want to give them. Though, he added with a wink that was a little too forced, I think Nanu just wants you to do some of his work for him. Ash chuckled. If he really didn't like working, he wouldn't be a police officer as well as the kahuna. You think? He shrugged, because he wasn't sure. He was mostly sure that Nanu liked looking out for people and would never, ever admit it. Ash liked looking out for people too, but it wasn't like the kahuna. They'd all been chosen. Specifically picked to help people and Pokémon, bridging the gaps between one world and another. Ash had been called the Chosen One once or twice, but it always just felt like he was in the right place at the right time. And right now, it felt like the right time to move on. I don't know how good I'd be at any of that anyway, he said. I mean, you know I won a league before? The Orange Islands. It wasn't like a normal league though, more like the Battle Frontier. The professor slowly nodded. You won that, too, I hear. Yeah, he hesitated, lifting his arm to look at the ring around his wrist, and the crystal that hadn't yet gone back to its original shape. The crystal felt real. The battle had felt real. But he wasn't, the championship still didn't feel real. Did I ever tell you what happened at my first league? Back in Kanto? He paused, then turned to look at him directly. Ash couldn't look away from his Z-ring. I got through to the top 8. In the Indigo League, there were heaps and heaps of competitors, so I'd had a couple of matches before then. But some stuff happened with Team Rocket before my next match, and I barely made it on time. They almost disqualified me. Like your match with Hao, he noted, and Ash winced. It wasn't exactly the same, but it kind of was, too. Depending on how you looked at it. By the time I got to the stadium, all my Pokémon were exhausted, except for one, my Charizard, he said. We're great friends now, and it's one of my most powerful partners. But back then, I hadn't trained it right, and it didn't trust me. When I sent it out to battle, Charizard decided to go to sleep. He felt more than saw Professor Kukui rock his weight back in realization, but didn't bother to acknowledge it. It wasn't a move or a status effect. It was just Charizard going to sleep. The referee called the match, he said, and then paused for a few moments before lifting his head to look down the beach toward Rowlet. In Kanto, those are the rules. In Kanto? How would have won that match? Kukui took a long deep breath before pointing out, but we're not in Kanto. No, but we're not in Kanto, Ash, he said again, more firmly. And I'm not sure even you would have brought Rowlet to a Kanto League match. Huh? He jerked around to look at him, but the professor just raised an eyebrow in response. Would you? He frowned, really considering the question. Would he have taken Rowlet to a Kanto League match? He'd taken Charizard, despite their lack of bond. But he'd done a lot of dumb things in the Indigo League. He'd been a bit more strategic in the Johto League, and then Sinnoh, he'd battled really strategically in Sinnoh. Really competitively. He'd earned every single win at the Sinnoh conference. He'd tried to be a little different in Unova, and even though he slid back in the rankings, he still felt proud of what he'd done there. He'd learned a lot about building teams and finding balance. He'd also learned a lot about what made him a good trainer, even when he was different to other people. In Kalos, he made it all the way to the finals, but he kind of felt like he lost his drive to compete somewhere around his 7th or 8th badge. There had been other things happening. More important things. He hadn't wanted it as much by the time the conference came around. Each conference since Johto had been different. He'd gone at them differently. But if he had to compare Alola and Kanto, it was like night and day. Alola didn't even have 6-on-6 battles until the very end. Only his battle against Guzma had been a fight. The battle against Hao, that hadn't even been his battle. It was Rowlet's. As far as Ash was concerned, it had never been a choice to include Rowlet or not, it was just what had to happen. The thing was, Ash had known he had to battle Guzma. He had to. He needed to defend Professor Kukui's dream. So he couldn't afford to lose the match to Hao. And yet, even though he'd been 100% sure that Rowlet wasn't ready, that Rowlet wasn't focused, that Rowlet was going to fail, he'd still taken Rowlet into the match. Because it was what Rowlet needed to do. Rowlet had won, in the end. Ash still wasn't sure it deserved it. He wasn't sure that he deserved it. But at the same time, Professor Kukui was right, this was Alola. In Alola, Ash hadn't really been driven by his own goals. He'd let Alola guide him. Let his friends guide him. His Pokémon, Naganadel, Lily, Gladion, Professor Kukui, all of his adventures had been focused on helping them. Doing all that, and then not letting Rowlet face off against its rival because it was bad strategy would have been wrong. If he could do the Kanto League again, he would make different choices, sure. But this hadn't been a do-over of the Indigo Conference. It had been the Manalo Conference. Manalo, he said softly. You and I are living here together. Professor Kukui prompted, and Ash felt his shoulders sag with a bit of relief. He hadn't thought anything of the conference name before, he never did. Silver, Evergrande, whatever, they were just names. But Manalo, it was about sharing. Everyone working together. That was what Alola was all about. If a champion was supposed to be the end result of their conference, he was pretty proud of being the Manalo champion. So, what choices will you make there, then? He blinked and looked up at Professor Kukui again. Huh? When you go back to Kanto, he clarified. That's your plan, right? To go home? He stared at him. How could he possibly know that? He'd only decided last night. Rotom told you already? When? No, Professor Kukui gave him a strange, lopsided smile. Honestly, I always knew you'd leave after the conference. Ash frowned. This felt strange, somehow. How come? It's what you do, isn't it? It sounded so short and blunt that Ash flinched, but the professor grabbed his shoulder almost immediately, dragging him back the inch he'd moved. Sorry, that came out harsh again, he said. It's not a bad thing. It's just, you're a traveler. You come to a new place, you learn as much as you can, you do everything that place needs, and then you go. Ash lowered his head slightly, silently acknowledging the fact. It just sounded so selfish, hearing it out loud like that. Sorry if I've caused you a lot of trouble these last few months. The professor chuckled. Every little bit of trouble was paid back 100 times in great experiences, Ash. Trouble is what makes life interesting. He had to laugh. It sure does. They grinned at each other, and Professor Kukui stepped back, his hand falling onto his hip instead. You know, Ash, I'd like to think you've really learned a lot here in Alola. But I think there's still one more lesson you need to learn. Yeah, he asked, and the professor nodded. So when you go back to Kanto, I'm giving you some homework. Homework? That's right. So you don't forget what you've learned here in Alola. Ash blinked again, not following. He hadn't been given any homework when he left normal school? Okay, what is it? On your next adventure, he began, I already know you're going to make some great friends, and I know you'll help a lot of people. But this time, I want you to try something new. Something new? This time, I want you, the professor paused, leaning down a little to better meet Ash's eyes, to try being honest. Ash flinched again, immediately defensive despite himself. Hey, I don't. I'm not saying you lie, he said quickly, but you and I both know there's a lot of stuff you don't tell people. For example, if someone asked you if you know about the Manalo conference in Alola, what would you say? Ash's frown deepened, because as much as he didn't want to admit it, he knew his answer would just prove the professor's point. He'd probably say he was there. He'd probably say it was fun. He probably wouldn't say he'd won. It didn't help that the professor smiled sadly like he knew what Ash was thinking. And if someone mentioned Solgaleo, what would you say? He pressed his lips together. He'd probably just say it was such a cool Pokémon, if he said anything at all. Aha. And how about if someone asked you, why you look so upset right now? I'm not. Ash stopped, then ducked his head, because what he'd been about to say wouldn't have helped his argument. He sighed. I don't like being called a liar. I know, he said, and knelt down in front of him, so Ash couldn't really avoid his gaze. Ash always kind of hated when Professor Kukui did that, even if it made a strange, deep part of him feel kind of warm. Especially when the professor gave him a soft, knowing smile like he was doing now. But I don't think it's helping anyone if you hide the truth just to seem like you're not lying. Kind of defeats the purpose, don't you think? He scratched his cheek, wishing the bill of his cap was wider. He missed being able to hide behind it. Manalo, Ash. You and I are living here together. We share this world together, Professor Kukui reminded him. Sometimes, sharing means trusting people, even when it's hard. If people don't believe you, then that's their problem. Remember that Burnett and I, your friends here, everyone, we will always believe you. We always have. He could feel tears burning behind his eyes, and he preemptively shoved at them, hating that the movement only made a drop of liquid squeeze out. I know. Everyone has been so amazing. And remember, you will always be our Manalo champion, Professor Kukui said firmly. So that's who I want you to be. Wherever you are, wherever you go, be the champion we all know you are. Show the world what being a Manalo champion is. Share everything that you are. Because we want to share everything we have, and that includes the best trainer we have ever seen. Our Manalo champion. Not someone he thinks he needs to act like. Tears cascaded down his cheeks, but Ash choked them back with a firm nod and a broad grin. Okay, Professor. I'll try. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing important ever was. This time, for the first time in a really, really long time, Ash was going to try being himself. That was, really, how it started. So, not even home for 10 days and already on a new adventure. You sure know how to motivate Ash, Professor Oak. Oak blanched, his head jerking around to stare at Delia. Oh, come now. You can't blame me for this. If I'd wanted Ash to become anyone's research fellow, I would have offered him a job myself. Heaven knows Tracy and I aren't able to get any field research done with everything else we do. MMHM. And I suppose it's just a coincidence that you decided to bring him along to the opening of a lab that didn't yet have any field staff? Mimey looked up at the two humans curiously, trying to gauge their emotions. As a species, Mr. Mimes were generally considered quite intelligent as Pokémon went, and Mimey knew that he was considered a particularly good example. While other Pokémon were easily distracted by food or battle, Mimey preferred the sense and order of the wider human world, particularly the order of a well-kept house. That carried the side effect of dealing with humans on a fairly regular basis. He'd gotten to understand them pretty well. For example, although he knew he technically belonged to Ash, and was always happy to join the wider team for training when there wasn't housework to do, he knew his job was taking care of Delia. It was his job to watch out for her, keep her company, help her out, and generally be the companion that Ash wasn't able to be. Eventually, he'd realized that Delia didn't really need taking care of. What she needed was reassurance that Ash was being looked after. Because it was obvious he didn't look after himself, and Pikachu only encouraged him. She'd been much happier lately, knowing she could visit Ash at any time, and that he had Professor Kukui to look after him. She liked being able to pretend that all he really had to worry about was school and Pokémon battles, and not the big Pokémon Pikachu told Mimi about whenever they talked. She was still smiling, but as they followed Ash and the new humans up the stairs, Mimi knew Delia was definitely not happy about this research fellow thing. She hadn't been happy from the moment the glasses-wearing human grabbed Ash's shoulders. If Delia wasn't happy, then Mimi wasn't happy. I didn't think it would come up, Oak insisted. After all, what kind of professor opens a new research laboratory for business without field staff? I thought for sure he would have students already. I just brought Ash along to see if he was any more interested in academia after his time at the Pokémon school. They paused at the top of the stairs, looking down the hall to where Ash and the other humans had stopped in front of a door. As the glasses-wearing human pushed it open, Delia looked back at Oak. Do you think it will be all right? People don't normally make such a fuss when Ash mentions Pokémon speaking to him, she said. And to have offered him a job so quickly, not even a question about his experience? I didn't think Ash was that famous. I know it all seems a little convenient, Oak admitted. Professor Cerise is very interested in the myths and rumors of the Pokémon world, many of which Ash is at the very heart of. But he's a good man. A little presumptuous, and I won't deny opportunistic, but I very much doubt he means any harm to the boy. Mimi tilted his head, judging the slight shift of Delia's shoulders as she absorbed that information. It wouldn't be fair of me to ask whether he'll take advantage, would it? Oak grimaced and didn't answer, while Delia sighed. She led the way down the hall to join everyone in what turned out to be a bedroom, where Ash was just proclaiming "live in" to be the best, whatever that meant. By the time Mimi had actually managed to follow Delia into the room, Ash was already arguing with the other boy about who would get top bunk. Obviously, Ash had found a solution to the big commute. He would be staying here. The other Pokémon would be a little annoyed he didn't say goodbye, but they'd be happy to know he was still close, and at least it looked like he would have fun here. All right, if that's how it's gonna be, Delia said brightly, and then bent down to Mimi's height. Mimi? He looked at her, already knowing what the question would be. Even if Ash was going to have fun, it was important he had someone to look after him. If Mimi was any judge of Delia and Oak's conversation, the man in glasses was maybe going to take advantage of his trainer. That would make Delia sad. Would you mind looking after Ash for me, please? He smiled broadly and thumped his fist against his chest. Of course he'd look after him. And besides, from the look of this house, it was in pretty desperate need of someone keeping the whole place in order. Mimi would keep things going right. It wasn't something Ash spent a lot of time thinking about, but so many people in Alola had talked about feelings and energy that he'd kind of fallen into a bit of a habit of noticing it. Energy, that is. Energies were something he'd ignored for a long time, something he'd kind of learned not to mention too much. Before he went to Alola, at best people told him it was a kind of aura power. At worst, people called him crazy, or said he was just looking for attention. But in Alola, energy was just something people talked about. Maybe more metaphorically than he did, but they didn't even blink when he mentioned it, so it was basically the same. So he'd let himself notice it again. Where before he'd taken moments to enjoy the sun on his face or the wind in the trees, now he would let himself sink into them, feeling the energy in the light and shadows, the feelings in the wind, the emotions of the creatures around him. But tonight, lying in his new bed, petting Pikachu's back and staring up at the bunk above, Ash found himself listening to a different kind of energy. It was kind of distracting. At first, he'd thought it was the house. The Cerise Institute was a funny kind of place. Both old and new, the lab was so high-tech, but the house was made of old wood, and there was something so tired about it. Mimi thought it was just the lack of care and was already rushing around, making plans to clean everything from top to bottom. But Ash was sure there was something else. Not just the age or the disrepair, but there was something almost frustrated in this building. But as the house fell still and Ash's attention drifted, he realized there was something else, too. Go. Go was kind of weird. No, scratch that, Go was super weird. Planning to make his first Pokémon Mew? Ash had never met a Mew with a trainer, and honestly he couldn't imagine trying to train one. They were just so. He couldn't think of the words to explain it. There were plenty of wild, uncontrollable Pokémon, but Mew was? Every Mew was their own kind of incredible creature, and Ash couldn't imagine catching one. But his imagination didn't matter, at the end of the day. If Go believed he could catch Mew, then he absolutely could. Ash was absolutely going to cheer him on. Of course, catching Mew was going to be pretty hard without any other Pokémon, but Go seemed determined, and heck knew Ash had done crazier stuff, so why not? But that wasn't the only thing that made Go weird. Lying here in the dark, staring up at the bunk, Ash realized that Go felt kind of spiky. He blinked as the realization hit him. That was it. Go's energy felt like it was covered in tiny needles, bristling against the world. It kind of made Ash want to reach out and slide it, smooth it down into something soft. He wondered if he could. Did energy work like that? His lips pressed together at a sudden memory of his first meeting with Bulbasaur. It was a weird thought. It had literally nothing to do with Go or even anything that had happened that day. Go didn't even look like Bulbasaur. There was no reason to think of it. He was probably just tired and being weird again. He closed his eyes and tried to ignore the spiky feeling above him, instead focusing on the warm hum of Pikachu's electricity. He smiled, and went to sleep dreaming of new adventures. In the end, it wasn't just the Institute or Go that was weird. The whole lifestyle of being a research fellow was strange. Ash wasn't really sure whether he and Go should think of themselves as independent or not. They were the only ones that lived at the Institute. Professor Cerise, Run, and Krysa all went home every night, while Chloe was only there in the mornings and afternoons of school days. But there were cleaners that had come through every night until they moved in, at which point Mimey declared them its mortal enemies. Now they tended to stick to the public areas while Mimey cleaned the dorms, laundry, and bathrooms, and every weekday meal was taken care of by mysterious people that came in a big white van to stock the cafeteria. There were enough leftovers to carry them through the weekend, too. This is what it's like in a professional research institute, Go said when Ash questioned it. We're doing important work that will impact the whole world. Of course our every need gets sponsored. Sponsored, huh? Ash repeated thoughtfully, looking back at all the food they'd picked their breakfasts from. Why are you so surprised? You came here with Professor Oak, didn't you? Asked Go. You gotta know how research works. Huh? Oh, I dunno. Professor Oak usually just eats at Mom's cafe, he said, picking up his toast again. And either Professor Kukui or Professor Burnett cooked for the family. But I guess we never lived in an institute. Go looked at him curiously for a moment, his eyebrows doing an odd dance as he apparently decided between things to question. In the end, he asked, how can you know so many professors but not have any idea how research works? For a moment, Ash balked, caught between reactions. If Iris had asked him that question, he would have puffed up and defended himself, pointing out that it wasn't like he asked everyone he met how they got their breakfast. Whereas if someone like Bonnie had asked, he would have just shrugged and explained that he usually wasn't involved in research, so he'd never really learned what a researcher's life was really like. He usually just helped them out and left within a few hours. But that would be, he knew that either reaction would kind of be that not lying thing Professor Kukui had asked him to not do this time. Switching his reply to match what the other person wanted. He didn't know Go that well yet. He suspected Go would probably prefer the latter. But it wouldn't really be true, would it? Not really honest. So he took a breath and said, well, most of the researchers I talk to, we're either just talking about the thing they're researching, or it's not really about work at all. It's just hanging out with friends or family. So I guess I never really thought too much about how they do the stuff they do. Go pulled his head back with a wide-eyed blink, then smiled slightly and nodded. I guess that makes sense. And your mom seemed pretty close with Professor Oak too. Is he like a family friend? Ash relaxed slightly, relieved by the easy reaction. He nodded. Kinda. They've gotten pretty close the last couple years. How about you and Professor Cerise? You've known Chloe a while, right? Sure have. She and I have been friends for years. Professor Cerise has always been really impressed by my research, he said, and pulled his shoulders back, jerking his thumb at his own chest. Like I said, I've been waiting for him to ask me to be his assistant for ages. I always knew I'd end up working for him like this. With my research skills and drive, I'm sure to help Professor Cerise uncover all sorts of new and exciting information about the world of Pokémon. Ash chuckled. He loved passionate people, they were so much more fun to be around. Sure sounds like it. We're gonna have loads of fun. Together, I bet there's no mystery we can't solve. Right. They grinned at each other before tucking back into breakfast, and Ash felt his shoulders relax a little more. This honesty thing was turning out a whole lot easier than he expected. He could totally do this, for sure. He was slightly less sure a few days later, when they were all having lunch together and Ren said, so Ash, I've been meaning to ask. How exactly do you understand Pokémon? Krysa had just taken a mouthful and choked, while Professor Cerise paused but didn't actually stop eating. Ignoring everyone else's reactions, Ren clarified, is it clear words, like telepathy? Or do you just know their languages? I notice you find it easier with Pikachu and Mr. Mime than you do Scorbunny or any of the bug types. Ash wasn't exactly caught off guard, but he couldn't say he'd been expecting the question, so he knew his laugh probably sounded a little awkward, and he rubbed the back of his neck as he debated the best way to answer. They didn't think he was crazy. They all believed him when he tried to translate for Pokémon. He was pretty sure Professor Cerise had decided to offer him the fellowship because he'd mentioned Lugia's voice. Mentioning it hadn't been a mistake. This was fine. That's probably just 'cause I know them better, you know, he suggested. It's not like actual words or anything, though that'd be super cool. I've heard there are people who learn to understand Pokémon speech through lots of intensive practice, Krysa said, offering Ash a brief supportive smile before looking at Ren with a weirdly focused expression. It must be very difficult to learn the patterns and rhythms to be able to make sense of what can be very short sounds. Well, that's why I was curious, he said, practically ignoring her look as he stared at Ash. Mr. Mime at least helps by miming his words, but I've had Francois for years and I've never understood a single mag, let alone Nemite. Ash laughed again, because that was kinda funny. Go, on the other hand, leaned back a little with a frown. It is pretty incredible. I've been meaning to ask about how it was with Lugia. I thought maybe I just didn't notice, but I've reviewed the footage and it didn't make a single sound outside of attacking. So what you heard must have been a kind of telepathy, right? I guess, he said slowly. It kind of was, and it kind of wasn't. Pokémon made sounds, sure. But Ash had never really relied on that to understand what any of his partners were trying to say. He'd tried to explain it a couple of times, but never had a lot of success, because it was just. Brock had always just said it came with time and experience, but over his time, Ash had realized his experience didn't quite match up with everyone else's. I mean, Lugia definitely used some kind of telepathy to make me pay attention, sure. But it wasn't like real telepathy, with like words and stuff. Real telepathy? Professor Cerise repeated, lowering his fork. You mean, when human language is spoken directly into the mind? Yeah. Just try it, he reminded himself. If they didn't believe you, that's their problem. He smiled to bolster himself and continued, I mean, it's different than like, when I talk to Pikachu and Mimey. That's more just knowing what they mean, you know? But usually when a Pokémon uses telepathy it's like actual words. With Lugia, it wasn't words, but kind of just a let's go feeling, you know? Fascinating, Cerise murmured, while Ren closed his eyes, mouth flattening out into a confused grimace, and Krysa gave her research partner an unimpressed look. Ash wasn't sure why she didn't seem to like him bringing up the question when everyone else looked okay with it. Go looked over to where the Pokémon were eating from their own bowls. Is that what it's like with Pikachu and Mr. Mime? Feelings? Kind of. He winced, scratching his cheek. With Pikachu I think it's just that we've been together for a really long time. And I mean, Mimey gives loads of hints. Hints, huh? I sure don't catch them, he said dryly, but Ash laughed. I'm sure it'll start making sense eventually. You've only just become a Pokémon trainer, go. I bet you'll know exactly what your Pokémon mean in no time. I wonder about that, Ren said, and they all looked at him again, Krysa's eyes widening and gaining an even more pointed stare, but he either didn't notice or ignored it. I mean, even putting aside the fact that I've had Francois for years and still need context clues to know what it wants, Go plans to catch hundreds of Pokémon. That's very different to most trainers. Oh, that's what you're talking about. Okay, Krysa said, her gaze softening and shifting over to Go. It's fairly normal to get to know your Pokémon and what they want if you've spent a lot of time with them, so of course you'll probably learn to understand Scorbunny, to some extent. But you'll probably find it a bit harder with the bug types and other Pokémon you might catch. A partner is different. You think so? He asked, and the adults all nodded while Ash picked up his sandwich again, refocusing on his food. It's like the kids at school, Professor Cerise said. You know Chloe very well, and got to know her habits and quirks, right? Go frowned, nodding once. Yeah, of course. We've known each other for years. But there were some kids in your class that you'd known just as long, right? Like Danny and Roger? Ash looked at Go sideways, wondering who Danny and Roger were, but Go looked just as blank as he felt. Except he nodded again. Yeah. But even though you've known them for a long time, you never really got to know them that well, because you didn't spend as much time together, Professor Cerise explained, his tone kind but carefully patient, like he was reminding him of something obvious. It will be the same with your Pokémon. It's impossible to get to know hundreds of Pokémon on a personal level. But there will be some Pokémon that you'll spend more time with. They'll become what some trainers call their team. I wouldn't be surprised if you start to get to know what your team members mean when they speak to you. That sounded a lot more like what Brock always explained to their friends, so Ash smiled and nodded along. Besides, it was pretty true, too, he loved all his Pokémon, but it would be a lie if he said he was as close to all of his Tauros as he was to say, Baizel, or Bulbasaur. He'd never really gotten that close to Mimi either, but they were already working on that. You're already getting it with Scorbunny, right? Ash prompted. Like, you know the difference between when it wants your attention just because it wants it, and when it actually needs something, right? Go blinked, then looked down at his plate. He frowned again. I guess. And you guys have only been partners for a week, he pointed out. That's so fast. You guys are really going to be a great team. But, it'll be different with the bug Pokémon? He asked, and the others shrugged. And any other Pokémon you catch. It's not a bad thing, Go, Professor Cerise said gently. You'll have different relationships with everyone you meet. People and Pokémon. And you'll communicate with them in different ways. Figuring out those relationships, and seeing them change, is part of growing up. He looked up at him, then around at Ash, before lowering his eyes back to his plate. I guess? Ash shoved the last of his sandwich in his mouth, considering Go's profile. It was always cool watching new Pokémon trainers learn, even if it could get kind of frustrating sometimes. Everyone was different. He'd never had a friend like Go before. When he'd first started out, Ash had dreamed of owning every single kind of Pokémon there was, or at least every Pokémon in the Kanto region. But he'd quickly realized that he didn't want to do what Go was doing. He'd really hated catching Krabby and seeing its Pokeball disappear right out of his hand. He'd struggled with not having access to his full team in Unova too, even though he'd actively been trying to learn a different kind of strategy there, trying to be competitive. What he'd long since realized was that he wanted friends, not a collection. So catching huge amounts of Pokémon just didn't work for him. But Go didn't think like that. Each of his catches was a triumph, a step on his journey to Mew. And he wasn't a bad trainer. He took good care of his Pokémon, letting them roam free, feeding them, talking to them. Ash couldn't help but think the Institute felt more like a safari park than a family, but it didn't seem like a bad thing. But then Go's spiky energy flared, and he looked up at Ash with furrowed brows. Lugia isn't part of your team, though. Oh. Yeah. That was how they got onto this topic. We were friends for a while there though, right? He asked. You felt that too. I felt the weird energy right before Lugia blasted the water out of the way, he corrected. I wouldn't call that friendship. Well, no, but... Ash grinned, shrugging again. I dunno. It's just what I felt. I thought you, me, Pikachu, and Lugia were all kinda friends in that moment. And friends understand each other. Right? Go hummed, his energy bristling. Once again, Ash felt the weird urge to pat it down, but he made do with a laugh. Well, at least a little. But learning to understand is the really fun part of making new friends, right? He smirked. I dunno if I understand you, yet, he said, but then leaned back in with narrowed eyes and a finger pointing at Ash's face. But I'll work it out, just you wait. Man, Go really was gonna be a lot of fun. Sure. And I'll do my best to figure you out too, Go. Ren laughed, and Krysa smiled gently, but when Ash looked over it was to see Professor Cerise watching them with a weird expression. He was smiling, but it didn't quite reach his eyes until he noticed Ash's glance. Then he turned to look around the table at everyone. You know, I just realized we never really celebrated Go and Ash joining the team. So I propose a toast, to the formation of the first full research team of the Cerise Institute. Here, here, Ren cried, grabbing up his drink and lifting it, and Krysa giggled but followed suit. Ash and Go exchanged grins and snatched their own drinks, and the entire team clinked their glasses together. To the Cerise Institute research team. Let's all look forward to learning together, Professor Cerise said, and Ash could definitely drink to that. Watching him puzzle through how to explain the energy used in Dynamaxing, Ren decided he definitely liked Ash. He'd assumed he would, of course. He was young and enthusiastic, and despite looking like the sort of kid that had teased Ren mercilessly as a child, he'd been nothing but polite and showed genuine interest in the aspects of research he didn't understand. But he was still a loud, energetic jock, so Ren had kind of been waiting to discover some obnoxious smugness under a veil of publicly appropriate kindness. Instead, he'd found a confident kid that knew his limits, but was trying to push past them. Academia, it turned out, was one of those limits. I don't know the words, he'd said when Krysa realized he'd been staring at a blank notebook for literal hours. Go's so good at this stuff. He can use all these big words, and make everything into numbers, and he sounds so smart when he writes it all down. But even when I know exactly what I need to say, I try and write it down and my head just freezes up. My brain goes all grrk. And every bone in my body is all ack. And, grrk? Ack? Ren repeated blankly, and Ash stopped, then winced. Yeah. And that's all you can come out with, Krysa surmised, and exchanged glances with Ren. They kind of knew what he meant. Ren used to feel like that when he had to give presentations at school. Your brain felt like it was literally encased in something solid, and every bone suddenly felt about an inch too long for the joints, the muscles around them no longer flexing. He now knew it was because of adrenaline and the fear response, so it was strangely comforting to know someone with Ash's reputation could still react like that. "You know what," Ren said, lifting a finger, "I don't think we need it." "I'm sorry?" Krysa asked, while Ash blinked. "Huh? Look, the things you're going to give us insight into aren't going to be something you can explain with numbers. And I bet you don't know the technical term for a psychic non-linguistic pulse." "A what?" "So it's not like anything you'd put in a report could be copy and pasted into our articles," he continued, and then turned to look at Krysa. "Let go write that kind of stuff. I think we'll get a lot better information out of Ash just by interviewing him and writing the notes ourselves." It was generally working out pretty well. It was a lot faster than having Ash angst over empty notebooks, anyway. But it could still be occasionally frustrating. It wasn't easy to translate, like "oh kapow," into "the subject begins to feel intense build-up" and, without it becoming repetitive, or, quite frankly, inappropriate for a scientific discussion on battle technique. But Ash was trying to be helpful, and they were trying to understand, so everyone kept at it. Dynamaxing, however, was proving difficult for even Ash to explain. "Probably, 'cause it wasn't my Pokémon," he said, folding his arms with a huff. "Snorlax was wild, so I dunno what it's like normally." "I thought you had a Snorlax," Ren said, leaning over to check his notes about Ash's full roster, but Ash shook his head. "No, I don't mean what a Snorlax is like. I mean what that Snorlax is normally like. You know, how it feels and stuff." He didn't know, but he could roll with it. Well, was there anything that changed during the Dynamax process? When it was physically growing? Ash closed his eyes with a frown, obviously thinking about it. "I dunno, Dynamax is so, Ren absently tapped his pen against his tablet, trying to find the right angle to prompt him from, but eventually, Ash looked up again, his jaw clenched, and took a deep breath before saying, "It feels hotter." "Hotter? That's interesting, I don't think I've ever heard it described as heat," he said, but Ash shook his head again before he could even start writing it down. "No, not like fire. Hotter like you know when people get mad? When they're like, angry and all clenched up and arg," he growled, holding up flexed fists with hunched shoulders. "That always feels kind of hot. But not like heat hot. Like electricity hot. Only not as fast. That's what Dynamaxing feels like to me. It feels like electrical fire, and anger, and I mean, Snorlax was sleeping, so it wasn't angry, but it was that same kind of energy. Except it came from the ground. It was like the ground was yelling up to the sky and Snorlax was helping it get there. Like grrrrrrrrg. You know?" Ren blinked, and Ash paused, then winced and fell back into his shoulders. "I mean, that's what it felt like," he said, a little quieter. Not for the first time, Ren had to bite down on a million questions. When he and Krysa had asked why Professor Cerise would hire a kid off the street just because he was stupid enough to jump on Lugia's back and claim it spoke to him, the professor had admitted it had more to do with rumors than anything definite. He'd shown them a dozen articles from other Pokémon professors that cited Ash as a key trainer. He'd told them all about the stories that flew around his name. Half-baked retellings of a boy that could do impossible things with Pokémon. A boy whose appearance in a region was a quiet portent of change and excitement. Who always seemed to be there when legendary or mythical Pokémon were publicly cited. He was almost a Pokémon mystery in and of himself. Professor Cerise wasn't the type of person that let chances like that pass him by. While Ren and Krysa were both excited to find out more, Krysa argued that Ash was a colleague, and they shouldn't treat him like a research study. Which Ren totally agreed with. But he was still insanely curious when Ash came out with things like this. "What about evolution?" he asked instead. "Do you ever feel any kind of energy when a Pokémon evolves?" Ash jerked, staring at him blankly for a second, then seemed to slump, smiling broadly. But it quickly faded as he looked up and off to the side, considering the question. "Yeah. But it's nothing like this. I mean, Mega Evolution is closer, but it's totally not the same either. That's more like from in here, while evolution is like all that." This was definitely from the ground. Ren physically bit down on his lip and forced himself not to ask. "Okay. Let's keep it to the Dynamaxing for now. Electrical fire, you said?" Although he mostly only dealt with Jessie, James, and Meowth, and Wobbuffet, but honestly, did Wobbuffet count? Ash was aware that there were more Team Rocket members. There were those two people that Jessie and James didn't like, the woman with the hair thingies and the guy whose name was super hard for even other people to remember. There was the science guy from Unova. Ash was pretty sure he was a thing, though he didn't really remember him that well. That girl that could do the flippy stuff, actually there were a few of them, but there was the one Brock had fallen in love with and the sisters from Johto, specifically. Oh, and all the mean, black-wearing people that hid their faces under low caps and didn't say much except, "Yes sir." And the boss. Ash didn't like to remember the boss. So he knew Team Rocket was a big organization. He was pretty sure he wasn't the only one who had to deal with them all the time. But it was still weird to hear about them causing problems for other people. Well, I think it's Team Rocket. That's part of the problem. I'm not even sure it's an actual attack, Norman said wearily, rubbing the back of his head. I know someone is trying to get into my gym, and that they're bothering the Pokémon, but I never arrive in time to catch anyone. I was thinking it might just be some kids in the neighborhood, but the last time it happened, I found a bad whip burn on Slaking. I'm done taking chances. Ash frowned. Slaking was no pushover, so anyone capable of hurting it? He and Go had been on their way back to the train station after the Battle Frontier Flute Cup, Go marveling over how different battle was than he'd thought, when Ash was pulled up short by a familiar call of his name. He was shocked to recognize Norman running up to him. They weren't in Petalburg. Norman was the Petalburg gym leader, and the father of May and Max, two of Ash's former traveling companions. Go had gotten oddly quiet and fidgety when he heard that, but hadn't objected to Norman offering to buy them dinner. But he'd gotten even more awkward when Norman explained he'd been in the audience at the Flute Cup and had been trying to get away from various reporters and commentators all day, just trying to talk to Ash. Apparently, he wanted a favor. "Is Slaking okay?" Ash asked, and he nodded. "Of course. I took it to Nurse Joy and she patched it right up." "That's good," he said. "What about the rest of your Pokémon? Have any of them gotten hurt?" "Not that I noticed, but I do think they've been battling," he said. "They're a lot more tired recently, but of course it's not like any of them could tell me why." Go was looking at Ash from the corner of his eye, but all Ash could do was shrug back. Stuff like this happens sometimes. In return, Go gave him an annoyed frown and squared his shoulders as he turned back to Norman. "So you'd like Ash to help you understand them?" "What?" Ash asked, trying not to look too shocked. He knew he wasn't exactly great with social niceties, but he was pretty sure Go had just implied a gym leader couldn't understand his Pokémon. But maybe he hadn't, because Norman just chuckled and shook his head. "No, nothing like that. No, Ash, I was hoping you might lend us one of your team." "Huh?" he asked, switching back to stare at Norman, who smiled humorlessly. "These, whatever they are starting to impact my gym battles. My Pokémon are distracted, stressed, and tired. That means they can't put their all into our battles with challengers," he explained. "If it was a consistent problem, I'd hire some local trainers, have them camp out for a few days, and catch the people responsible. But it's not. So I need someone who can stick around for maybe even weeks at a time. I'd ask May to come home for a while, but the contest season just started, and if this is Team Rocket, I'm going to need a Pokémon trained for hard battle. And since I can't promise there will always be a human there to give direction, I need a Pokémon that can work independently. From what May and Max tell me, your Pokémon are pretty resourceful even when you're not there to tell them what to do." I mean, my Pokémon are always good in a pinch, but," Ash looked down at Pikachu, sitting in his lap, and then over at Mimi. It had been sitting at the end of the table, eating an invisible plate of food and ignoring the conversation, but it met Ash's glance easily. It raised both hands in a shrug, and then gave him a dark smirk and mimed a twig in its mouth. He frowned, lowering his gaze back to Pikachu. "What do you think?" Pikachu folded its arms and bowed its head, thinking hard. Pika. His Pokémon were good in a pinch. They'd all learned enough and been in enough unstructured battles to know how to handle themselves whether he was there or not. But that didn't mean Ash was comfortable putting them in danger alone. Especially not when someone was attacking a gym. Even if it was Team Rocket, they had to be either really stupid or really strong to even try it. He didn't want any of his friends taking that kind of risk. But he'd already promised to work for Professor Cerise. It had only been a couple of weeks. He couldn't just leave to help Norman, especially if it did just turn out to be some dumb kids trying to get a cool Pokémon as their partner. Loaning out one of his heavy hitters would be better. "Of course, it would be ideal if you could loan us one Max Nose," said Norman. "You know he'd spoil them silly. But anyone you could spare would be a great help." At the reminder of his friend, Ash looked up again. "How is Max handling it? He's not trying to catch these bad guys himself, right? We're trying to keep him focused on school, but without his sister's theatrics, I'm afraid he's picking up the detective habit," he said with an embarrassed grin. "That's the other reason I was hoping you would help. You know he'll try and get involved, so I'd rather a Pokémon I can trust to protect him if he gets in over his head." His Hoenn team were familiar with the problem. Any of them would be willing to fight their absolute hardest for Max, and they wouldn't take stupid risks if he was on the line. "Okay," he said, unfolding his arms. Let's go to the Pokemon Center when we're done with dinner, and I'll ask Sceptile. Honestly, it's probably getting kind of bored on the ranch, so this'll be a good chance for it to get some exercise. Pika Pika. Pikachu agreed with a laugh, while Mimey shrugged carelessly and Norman's shoulders slumped in relief. Thank you, Ash. You really don't know how much this means to me. Go looked between the two of them curiously, his brow furrowing again. When they got to the Pokemon Center and called Professor Oak, he was a little surprised with the late call but not by the request. Most of Gary's team are loaned out to gyms at the moment, he explained as he put out the call for Sceptile to come in. But you can understand why the Sinnoh Pokemon community are on a slightly higher level of alert. Go frowned, glancing at Ash, but he didn't really have time to explain as Norman promised he didn't intend to keep Sceptile for long. Just enough to settle his nerves and hopefully deal with the problem. As expected, Sceptile was more than willing to help out, thrilled to be getting some real action after too long with nothing but friendly battles to keep its skills up. But it did seem a little miffed that Ash wouldn't even battle with it once to get back in the rhythm. Sorry, buddy, he said. But the last train to Kanto leaves in half an hour, and we've gotta be back in Vermilion in the morning or a whole lot of Pokemon are gonna go hungry. Sep, it said, accepting the reasoning, and let Ash hug it tightly. Be careful, okay? Don't do anything crazy. My mister, Mimey added, and Pikachu laughed before punching the air. Pi Pikachu Pika. Go stood off to the side, one of those weird, shiny-eyed expressions on his face, but he didn't say anything until after Ash had shaken hands with Norman and they all went their separate ways. Do you know a lot of gym leaders? Ash shrugged, recalling Mimey into its Pokeball so it could get some rest on the journey. Not personally. I mean, I've battled a lot of them, and you get to know people pretty well that way. But they're all supposed to be incredibly strong, and one of them came to you for help, Go pointed out, raising his eyebrows. That's a pretty big deal. He shrugged again. Not really. Gym leaders are busy, especially if they've got other jobs on the side. Besides, everyone can use a helping hand sometimes. Actually, helping out gym leaders is what got me a few of my badges in the Indigo League, earning them through merit, instead of battle, he explained. But, in the interests of honesty, he added, but even if it wasn't. Norman's my friend's dad, so he knows me. He knows some of the stuff we did, so he knows my Pokemon can handle themselves when it's not a formal battle and stuff. I guess there's some more trust there, maybe. I guess so. Go looked away, hunching his shoulders, and then peeked up at Ash from under his brow again. You have a lot of friends? It seemed like a bit of a switch in topic, so Ash blinked, but then grinned. Yeah. They're all really great. I haven't seen Max in ages though, so I hope you get to meet him when this is over. Oh, yeah, I guess, he said, and then looked away again. Which was another odd reaction, so Ash paused, but ultimately decided it would probably be better not to ask what was wrong. Go had already had a pretty rough day, losing his first ever battle, getting into that weird disagreement with Hodge, and now meeting a stranger that Ash knew well? It was probably a lot. So Ash gripped the straps on his bag, focused his gaze on Pikachu and Scorbunny running ahead, and tried to seem casual as he said, but that's the really great thing about going on a Pokemon journey. You get to meet all sorts of people, and you make all kinds of friends you might not have before. Like Hodge. I probably never would have talked to him normally, but he was such a nice guy. Maybe to you, Go mumbled. All I did was get in a fight with him. And then he beat me in that dumb battle before I even got a chance to do anything. Yeah, but that was just bad luck, he insisted. That's kind of the problem with these kind of blind tournaments, there's no way to make sure the rounds match the skill level of the trainers. Sometimes, beginners luck out and get all the way to the finals just by only battling other beginners, and sometimes the biggest fight in the tournament happens in the first round, because that's when the two best battlers are matched up. It's just too bad that your first match was with a guy that was probably always gonna get to the finals. You probably would have done way better against someone else. Go peeked at him again, but quickly turned back to watching Scorbunny. Easy for you to say. You're an amazing battler. I bet you've never lost a battle in your life. Ash laughed, imagining the reactions of some of his friends if they'd heard that. No way. I've lost so many battles. Especially when I was first starting out, I had to learn a lot about how to be a good trainer by making a lot of mistakes. At least you had a strategy for your first match. I didn't even know how to battle. But Go just scoffed, obviously not believing him. Which was such a weird feeling that Ash legitimately didn't know how to react. If Misty had been here, she would have had a field day, listing every dumb mistake Ash had ever made until he was forced to go live under a rock somewhere. In the end, it was Go to speak first. It doesn't matter, he said quietly. I don't need to be a good battler. You throw enough Pokeballs and you can catch any Pokemon. That's all I'm interested in. Ash winced, once again debating whether he should push the issue. It wasn't that he thought Go was a bad trainer, but he didn't seem to understand how Pokémon felt. Ash had really hoped that battling would let Go see his Pokémon's true passions, not just their strengths. Like Scyther, who obviously wanted to learn to battle, while Pinsir had been happier staying home. Like Scorbunny, who obviously wanted to explore its inner fire, but never got the chance because Go didn't care about expanding its skill set. But, different trainers were different. And most Pokémon trainers weren't battlers. It was okay for Go not to want that for his Pokémon. But Ash really hated how lonely Go seemed. And battle was such a good way to get know people and Pokémon. But, he supposed. Catching Pokémon is a good way to make friends, he admitted, and Go smiled. Sure is. I've been making a lot of good friends, lately. And when Go looked up at him again, even Ash could catch that hint. He grinned and snatched Go around the shoulders. You sure have. Here's to making loads more. Let's go. Go cheered, and they both laughed before refocusing on the road ahead. As they stepped out of Vermilion Station, Ash yawned, wishing they could have just stayed in Hoenn overnight. He didn't like traveling by train. Sure, it was faster, and they'd gotten a nap overnight, but it wasn't enough. He was feeling pretty foggy as Go grabbed him by the wrist and started dragging him toward the bus stop. Scorbunny was running around their feet, but at least Pikachu had the sense to be as equally exhausted as Ash, slumped over his cap and drifting in and out of wakefulness. Come on, Ash, Go insisted, yanking him a step faster. I want to write up my notes on the flute cup before I forget, and we have to give everyone breakfast. Quit lagging behind. Aha, he mumbled. People who could get by without sleep were the absolute worst. The train hadn't had a proper breakfast either, just some snack bars and juice. He was so hungry. Omastar? Ash blinked his eyes open and looked around, wondering why the voice had cut through the background of the city, but it actually took him a second to even find the source. An Omastar was standing with its trainer at the mouth of an alley. Omastar were pretty unusual, but even so, there was something kind of weird about it, so Ash planted his feet, Go's hand slipping off his wrist as he refused to be dragged any further. Pie? Pikachu lifted its head slightly. Pika. Ash, come on. Go said, coming back with his hands on his hips. We've got to feed everyone. He didn't answer either of them, taking a couple of steps closer to the alley. The trainer wasn't looking at him or the Omastar, just gazing at the wider crowd with weird eyes. He was dressed all in black, with a huge trench coat, and one of those flat caps that always seemed kind of familiar to Ash. Oh, wow, is that an Omastar? They're fossil Pokémon, right? Go asked, digging out his Rotom phone, but he trailed off when Ash didn't answer, still staring at the pair. Ash? Omastar looked normal. It wasn't doing anything, just standing there, also watching the crowd. Its little tentacles were absently tapping at the concrete. Pikachu clambered down to perch on Ash's shoulder, looking warily up at him. Pika, Pikapi? I dunno, he said softly. But, that's a real Pokémon, isn't it? A real Pokémon? Go repeated, glancing back at Omastar. What are you talking about? What else would it be? I don't know, he said again, while Pikachu focused on Omastar a little more intently. At their feet, Scorbunny looked between the humans curiously, and then abruptly swung around to sprint off. Scorbunny, no! Go yelped, running after it. Wait! Ash and Pikachu flinched and quickly followed, but they didn't manage to catch up before Scorbunny had already reached Omastar and was cheerfully greeting it with a raised paw. Scorbunny! Scorbunny! Score and I? Omastar glared at it, but luckily Go scooped Scorbunny up into his arms before it could make it any matter. He immediately dropped into an apologetic bow for the trainer. I'm so sorry. My Scorbunny can be a little impulsive, I hope it didn't startle you. Scorbunny, the man repeated curiously, tilting his head. What's a Scorbunny? This is, he said, straightening up to show off his starter. My partner. It's from the Galar region. The man raised an eyebrow. Galar, huh? Pretty rare here in Kanto, then. Ash frowned, something about the man's tone setting him on guard, but Go didn't notice, too busy with Scorbunny. How many times do I have to tell you not to run off like that? You're going to scare people. Say sorry. Bunny, it cried, and flailed its arms. Score! Scorbunny! Scorbunny, he warned, and it gaped, brutally offended by the rebuke. But Go wasn't much of a soft touch, so in the end it rolled its eyes and huffed out a mulish, scrbnny. That's better, he said, and looked back up at the man again. Sorry again for bothering you. No problem, he said, still gazing at Scorbunny. So are you from Galar? You must have a lot of interesting Pokémon. Oh, no. Just this one. We met on a research trip, he said cheerfully, and then bent down to smile at Omastar. This is Omastar, right? They're so rare. I heard they were extinct until a team of researchers learned how to extract them from fossils. Is that how you got it? The man gave an amused grunt and pulled a pokeball from his pocket. A black pokeball, with red markings. Ash frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly as a forgotten memory told him he'd seen one of those before, but was quickly distracted by the trainer hesitating. He looked up in time to see the man focusing on him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, though Ash still didn't know what exactly was bothering him, and the man didn't say anything to explain why he was staring either. In the end, the strange trainer looked away first, recalling Omastar into the pokeball and pocketing it. Something like that. I'd like to stay and tell you our life story and all, but we have a lot of things to do today. Oh. Of course, sorry, Go said, hunching into another quick bow before backing up. It was nice to meet you. Sorry again for Scorbunny. The man smirked and turned on his heel, heading off down the alleyway without another word. Ash watched him go, not sure why his hands had curled into such tight fists. He was probably just being weird again. Having a friend was strange. Go had always had Chloe, but he'd never really thought of her as a friend. She was a girl, for one thing, and it wasn't like they played together even when they were kids. They just did things together. Like going to movies or the park or reading. He never really even thought about whether he liked her, because she was a girl, and that would have made it a question of whether he liked her, and he didn't care about any of that. Mostly, she was just someone he did things with. But boys could be friends with boys without having to think about liking them, so he'd always figured that when he finally met a boy that wasn't boring or mean, that boy would be his friend. It sounded childish and stupid, and of course Go didn't really think like that anymore, but, well, it was kind of pretty much why he decided Ash would be his friend. But now he had a friend. Some days he kind of struggled to understand what that really meant. So you never went back to school after you graduated elementary? Nope, Ash confirmed. They were walking through town because Go needed new socks. It was a boring errand, one Go would have normally done on his own, but when he'd mentioned needing to go out, Ash had offered to come along to keep him company. Like that was a normal thing to do. It was weird. But anyway, on the way, they'd spotted some of the guys from Go's old class and he'd naturally tried to avoid them, which Ash thought was strange. I wasn't good at it, he continued carelessly. The only class I'd ever been good at was PE, so it seemed kinda dumb to keep going. I just helped out Mom in the cafe until I could get my first Pokémon. You worked in a cafe? Doing what? With anyone else, Go knew, he wouldn't have cared, let alone asked. He didn't really care about what other people did with their lives as long as it didn't interfere with his own. But for some strange reason, while he couldn't say he cared, he was curious to know about Ash's life. He didn't care, but he was interested. It was so weird. Oh, cleared tables, did dishes, that kinda stuff. Mom never let me try cooking, he said, and Pikachu muttered something on his shoulder that made Ash wince and laugh. Yeah, that was probably for the best, huh? Ash and Pikachu were weird, too. They were always together, to the point that if Pikachu wasn't around, Ash could actually look a little lopsided. And when Pikachu was just quiet, sitting on Ash's shoulder and not doing anything other than complimenting Ash's expressions, that was a little weird but fine. But when they had these sort of exchanges, Go felt something. He didn't really know what. It wasn't like Pikachu was human, so it couldn't be Ash's friend or anything, but when they talked like that, it felt like an inside joke that he was being purposefully excluded from. Which was ridiculous. Pikachu was a Pokémon. Pokémon weren't, that stuff didn't happen. He looked down at Scorbunny, who was a much more normal Pokémon, and had a much more normal relationship with its trainer. Him. He was Scorbunny's trainer. He was training Scorbunny. He was doing it the normal way. It didn't normally ride Go's shoulder, or sit in his lap, or any of the things Pikachu did without thinking. Because Go, being a normal trainer, imposed limits. He and Scorbunny had boundaries and stuff. That was what made them partners, and made sure Scorbunny never became like a pet, or anything. Like how the Cerise family treated Yamper. Yamper had no boundaries, and the family treated it like something to be played with and admired, and that was also different to Pikachu? Who was different to Mr. Mime? Who was different to anything Go had ever seen? He didn't understand it. So if you never went back to school, he tried to ignore the sidetrack his own thoughts had taken. What about your classmates? Do you ever miss them? Ash laughed awkwardly, scratching his cheek end. Looking off to the side. To be honest, I probably wouldn't recognize most of them if I saw them on the street. Go blinked. Your memory isn't that bad, is it? You spent years with those people. Yeah, but, he winced, then sighed and shrugged, lifting one open palm toward the sky. We didn't really get on, so, you know it. I didn't really need to remember them. You didn't really, wait a minute. Go gaped at him, leaning over the better to stare at Ash's awkward smile. Are you saying you didn't have friends at school? Of course I had friends, he snapped, but then stopped himself with a cringe and visibly backtracked. Friend. One friend. And we argued a lot. We were really nasty rivals by the time we were trainers. You didn't have friends? He cried. He couldn't believe it. Ash was so nice. So friendly. So weird. Actually, he could totally believe it. Kids never liked weird people. That was why he'd never bothered with anyone but Chloe. But Ash shrugged like it was no big deal. I had a lot of growing up to do back then. But like I said the other day, that's the cool thing about being a Pokémon trainer. You meet all kinds of great people, and make heaps of friends, he said, and then turned back to the road with a warm smile. I know I probably wouldn't recognize M, but it'd still be really cool to meet up with some of those people I went to school with. It'd be nice to see what everyone's become. But he couldn't understand it. They left you out of stuff. I bet they made you feel really bad. Why would you want anything to do with them? I wasn't exactly nice to them either, he pointed out. And it was a long time ago, you know? I changed. They probably did too. No point holding history against them. So, what? He was able to just forget everything? Forgive all those JRKS? Pretend he hadn't been lonely and angry and hurt? Go hunched his shoulders and looked forward, deciding it would be better for their friendship if he didn't tell Ash how stupid and naive he was. Something Ash had realized in Alola, and was now realizing was actually just a thing about not being a traveling trainer, was that normal people didn't have Pokémon battles all the time. When he was on his journey, it felt like the normal thing to do. You met a trainer, you battled them. It was a way to get to know the other person. Sometimes you didn't, but more often than not that told you something about the other person too, that they weren't much of a go-getter, or their interests were more academic, or more about looks and styling. Whereas when you didn't travel around as much, if you didn't get in a battle, it was usually because you were just busy doing something else. Because people who stayed in one place had a lot more stuff to do than Ash had ever realized. You had to spend a lot more time looking presentable, and cleaning, and working, and thinking about stuff that wasn't just making sure you and your Pokémon were ready for the next adventure. So when he was on his journey, it had never been too weird when someone stepped in his path and demanded a battle. It had been exciting. Now he was staying in Vermilion City, generally avoiding the major travel ways. He wasn't exactly expecting anything to happen on their way back from buying new socks. They'd been taking a shortcut down a back alley when the man stepped out of a doorway, turning to directly face them so they wouldn't just politely duck around him. He wasn't that big, but there was something about him that made Ash pause and lean back. Something weirdly familiar. But even with his faulty memory, Ash was pretty sure he didn't actually know the guy. He was older, somewhere around James' age, probably, with pink hair under a flat black cap. He wore a lot of black, actually, black pants, black boots, and under his long coat, his shirt was mostly black too, just with some red lines across the front. And there was something about his smirk that felt weird. Ash took a half step forward and across, blocking Go from moving forward. Interesting Pokémon you have there, the man said. The Pikachu looks good, but I've never seen a Pokémon like that before. Some kind of special EV. Score! Scorbunny cried, bristling with defensive pride, while Go laughed. No, this is Scorbunny. It's a Pokémon from Galar. How about we battle for it, the man asked, and before either of them could speak, he threw out a Pokeball, releasing a very angry-looking Cubone. Ash hesitated, something about it catching his attention, and so he wasn't at all prepared when the man ordered, Cubone. Bone Rush. Wah, I never agreed. Go yelped as the Cubone sprinted forward, but Ash got over his shock just in time to tackle him out of the way. Scorbunny barely jumped clear as the Bone Club smacked into the ground where it had stood, but Pikachu leapt off Ash's shoulder before they hit ground, already ready to fight. Pika Pika, it yelled, but Cubone just snarled back. See you Cubone. Ash shoved himself off Go and stood up, clenching his fists. Hey! We didn't agree to any Pokémon battle. See if I care, the man said with a grin. Headbutt. Pikachu, dodge it. Then use Quick Attack. Ash snapped back, and Pikachu flashed into movement, easily ducking under the attack to ram, lightning fast, into Cubone's front. Completely outclassed, Cubone flew backwards into the darkened doorway, knocked out before it even hit the ground. The man sneered but didn't back down, instead throwing out another Pokeball, and Ash grit his teeth as another Cubone materialized. Just like the last one, it felt kind of weird. He could almost feel its anger rippling over the hair on his arms. Hold on, that's not fair. Go cried. You can't send in another Pokémon unless there's an agreement for a multi-Pokémon battle. The man just laughed, and Ash clenched his fist in front of his face. As if this guy cared about the rules. No holding back, Pikachu, he said, and threw down his arm, visualizing the next two moves. Thunderbolt, let's go. Ash. Go gasped, but Pikachu snapped its agreement, running in as wide a circle as the alley would allow. Ha! The man threw out his arms, grinning widely. What are you, some kind of rookie? Cubone, thrash. Deep down, Ash knew types didn't matter. Ground didn't really mean an immunity to electricity. When he'd been too young and stupid to know better, he'd seen Pikachu fry more than one ground type. He knew it could be overcome. But right now, that wasn't the point, and Pikachu knew it too. The point was that even the most harmless strike caused a reaction. It was instinctive. You could be hit by a harmless feather and still automatically flinch in response. Immune or not, as the electricity surrounded Cubone, it froze up in instinctive response, letting the energy disperse. That split second was all Ash ever needed. Iron Tail, he ordered, and Pikachu whipped around, tail flaring blinding silver before cracking down on Cubone's armored head. The Cubone never even managed to finish lifting its club for the thrash. It started to crumple, but was caught by the red light of the Pokeball before it could fall. TCH, the man sneered again, snatching out another ball. You're not as soft as you look, are you? Ash shifted sideways, glaring out from under his cap. Soft or hard doesn't matter. I won't let anybody steal Pokémon. So give it up already and go home. Pika Pika. Pikachu agreed, hunching down over its front legs. Yeah, right. Let's see how you deal with this, the man yelled, throwing out a light that quickly solidified into a Marowak. Like the other two, it radiated fury, but this one's eyes burned red beneath its skull helmet, and the power of its anger made Ash's stomach clench. These three Pokémon hadn't been normal. They weren't right. But he wasn't given time to figure out why, as Marowak span its club through its fingers and charged. Pikachu, dodge it, he cried, forcing himself to snap out of it. Defend with Iron Tail. Defend? Go repeated wildly, but Pikachu knew exactly what to do. As it skidded out of the way of the first move, its tail flared silver, and Pikachu spun to catch the next swing in the curve of its tail. Marowak's third strike was struck back with an unnatural clang, while the fourth was easily parried, staggering Marowak with its own momentum. Now, Iron Tail, one more time. Ash called, flinging his hand out. Get rid of that club. Pika. Pikachu yelled, spinning through the air to slam its iron-coated tail against Marowak's hand. Sure enough, the bone went flying back, smacking into the man's stomach, and Marowak cried out in pain and loss. It had been a cheap shot. Marowaks, like Cubones, were almost spiritually attached to their bone clubs. Separating them was cruel. But sometimes, in a fight like this, Ash knew nice battling was a risk you couldn't take. He clenched his fist to steel himself against the guilt and set his shoulders. Quick attack off the wall. Pika Pika. Pikachu confirmed, blurring out of sight, only to reappear on the fence beside them for a bare moment before rocketing off it and straight into Marowak. It was slammed right off its feet and into the man's legs, bowling him over. The movement ripped open his jacket just long enough for Ash to recognize the red lines weren't lines at all. It was the letter R, Team Rocket. Okay, Pikachu, let's finish this. Ash yelled, lifting up his fist and pumping it down hard. Thunderbolt, let's go. Ka, it leapt into the air, spinning once before slapping its cheeks in preparation, and then let loose the same level of power it had sent against Lugia. And just as the move always did against JRKS from Team Rocket, it blasted both man and Marowak right off the ground, up into the sky and away. Ash watched them go, his breathing a little too hard. Team Rocket. Not Jesse, James, or even Meowth, but Team Rocket. The real Team Rocket. Who wore black and went after small scores, time and time again, until they had enough Pokémon and power to do something unforgivable. And they had the black and red Pokeballs again. That's where he'd seen them before. He knew those Pokeballs. He didn't remember where he'd seen them, but he knew them. They didn't care about capture recognition software. They didn't care about a lot of things. Wow, Go said quietly. That was kinda extreme, wasn't it? He swallowed and blinked rapidly, eyes flicking down to Pikachu, who looked back at him seriously, recognizing his mood. Which was fine, as long as it was Pikachu. Pikachu would understand, but it'd be no good if it was. He liked his lips and forced himself to relax as he turned back to meet Go's gaze. You okay? Is Scorbunny okay? Scorbunny, half hidden behind Go's leg, was staring up at him with wide eyes. It slowly edged out, paws tapping together nervously, and walked forward to look at Pikachu. SC, Score Bunny? Score Bunny. Pikachu assured it. Pika? Scorba, New York. We're fine, Go said over their continued conversation. But that was pretty intense, Ash. I know that guy wasn't following the rules, but I've never seen you battle like that. Not even against those Team Rocket guys. Actually, that was Team Rocket. What? He grimaced, rubbing the back of his neck. He wasn't sure he really wanted to get into all of that right now. He was too edgy. He wouldn't be able to explain. But Go had to understand what could have happened, so? That guy was a Pokémon thief. There's a lot of Team Rocket people like him. Are you sure? He didn't even try and steal anything, he was just forcing a battle. That's true, but he was already screwing this up. But how was he supposed to explain it? Jesse and James were dangerous, but they weren't like the rest of Team Rocket. Except they kinda were. They cared more. That was the only thing that made them different from any other lousy Pokémon thief out there. Pokémon thieves didn't care about the rules, and they exploited the laws. If you engaged in a Pokémon battle, even one you didn't formally agree to, you were technically accepting the wager. That meant that if someone challenged you with a Pokémon, you either had the choice to just let them take your Pokémon, or risk losing it. Then your only chance would be to steal it back. Thankfully, Officer Jenny tended to look the other way, if not outright offer to help if you ever got caught stealing back your own Pokémon. But Ash still hated it. He hated that all these teams were out there. He hated that they got away with so much. He hated. See you, Bone? They all jumped, spinning around to face the sound. Cubone. Go gasped. He never recalled it. The first Cubone was indeed staggering to its feet in the dark doorway the grunt had stepped out of. It was obviously woozy, but it still radiated anger and growled at their attention. See you, Cubone. Cubone. Pika, Pikachu snarled back, cheeks sparking. Cubone waved its club in what was probably supposed to be a threat. Scorbunny. Scorbunny announced, bouncing up alongside Pikachu with both paws raised in a kind of fighting stance. When Cubone waved its club again, Scorbunny did a few shadow punches and grinned. Score. Scorbunny, Bun. Pikachu huffed, amused despite itself, though it lost its smile as Ash stepped up alongside it, extending a paw like it could keep him back. Pika. It's okay, buddy, he said softly, kneeling down. The battle was over, but Cubone was still so angry, and it still didn't feel right. Now he was closer, he could see the red glint in its eye that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. What do we do with it? Asked Go. What are you supposed to do with lost Pokémon? Obviously, take it to the Pokémon Center or home until you could find its owner. But Ash couldn't bring himself to say anything, still staring at the little Pokémon. We can't catch it, right? Go continued nervously. I don't think I want to pick that thing up. It looks like it bites. Ash absently agreed. The black and red Pokeballs, he'd seen them before. He had. He knew how they worked. They terrified him. They could capture any Pokémon. Even a caught Pokémon. Even legendary Pokémon. They made Pokémon angry. Ash carefully reached out, only to stop as both Pikachu and the Cubone snapped at him. Pikachu. Pikachu ordered, slapping him with its tail, while Cubone waved its club again. See you, Bone. It's okay, he told them both, leaning past Pikachu to keep reaching out. You're just scared, right? You're scared, and you're angry, right? I get that. Pikachu quietly begged, but he couldn't pay attention. Cubone needed help, and Ash couldn't leave that alone. But Go knelt down beside him, looking even more nervous. Ash? It's okay, he said again, edging forward. Cubone snarled, brandishing its club, but it wasn't really aware enough to attack with it properly. The way it whacked Ash's arm might bruise, but it wasn't exactly a bone rush. You don't have to be scared. I'm not gonna hurt ya, I promise. See? No Pokeballs. Pikachu's staying back. It's just you and me, okay? See Cubone, it cried, smacking his arm even harder. Cubone. See you, Bone. He flinched at a particularly hard strike, but it was pretty much Cubone's last defense before Ash could finally lay a hand on its arm. What he hadn't expected was that as soon as he touched its skin, a sudden rush of images and emotions surged into his mind's eye, locking up every muscle from his fingertips to his spine. Mother. Warm. Kind. Mother. Dead. Dying. Had to die. Know that. Take up the mantle. Take up the crown. Trainer. Warm. Kind. Broken. Mean man. Bad man. Fight bad man. Fight. Fight. Ash? He turned his head slightly, acknowledging Go's call before refocusing on Cubone. He'd only ever experienced that rush when locking eyes with a Riolu or Lucario before, but he knew what it was. He swallowed again and offered up as much of a smile as he could manage. "You have a trainer," he said softly. "Not that Team Rocket guy, but a real trainer, right? Remember?" Cubone shook its head, but then stopped, paused, and shook its head again, more slowly this time. "See you, Bone? Remember?" he pressed. "Do you remember her?" "Cubone," it murmured. Some of the wrongness was starting to fade away. "Don't you want to go back to your trainer?" "Bone," it said. The tip of its club hit the ground as it stared blindly back at Ash. See you, Bone. Cubone? We can go to the Pokémon Center, or Officer Jenny," he offered. "We can help you find your trainer. So you can go back to her. Would you like that?" "Bone," it said again, and then sniffed and nodded its head. The wrongness was all gone. "Bone, Cubone. Come on," Ash said, and held out both hands. "Let's go." "Cubone," it said, and waddled forward until he could lift it up into his arms. He curled it in tight to his chest, hugging as much as lifting, and smiled as Pikachu immediately scampered up his back. He could see it scowling at him from the corner of his eye. "Pika Pikachu, Pikapi," it said, but then sighed and settled down on his shoulder, resigning itself to his choices. "Pika Pikachu." He snickered and didn't comment, just turning to look at Go. "Sorry about all this. Do you mind if we take a detour on the way home?" Go was staring at him. It wasn't his normal stare, or even the sparkly-eyed one he got sometimes, though it was kind of similar. His eyes were wider than they usually were with that stare, and his brow was furrowed, like people normally only did when Ash was doing something kinda reckless. This wasn't reckless, was it? But eventually, Go shook himself, coughed, and shoved himself to his feet. "Of course not. Come on. Are we going to the Pokémon Center or the police station?" "Pokémon Center first," Ash said. "That quick attack hit pretty hard, didn't it?" See you, Cubone," Cubone sobbed, while Pikachu rolled its eyes. "Pika Pikachu," it muttered. Ash didn't bother responding to the attitude. Pikachu always got sulky when Ash wanted to help someone that had attacked them. Just rocked back to his feet and let Go lead the way out of the alley. He didn't notice the woman sitting on the edge of the rooftop high over their heads. He had been too busy to notice her throughout the entire battle, even when the grunt she'd been originally keeping an eye on went flying on a wave of aura-enhanced electrical energy. But she had noticed him. She watched him carry a harmless, crying Cubone away from a battle it hadn't known it didn't want a part of. She lifted a hand to the device in her ear, patching through to a secure line. "Arlo," she greeted, "that complication Giovanni mentioned we might experience? I think I've just figured out what it might be." It was an odd sensation, realizing she was talking to Ash Ketchum. He didn't look anything like she remembered. Of course Jenny remembered Ash. It would be pretty hard to forget the brash newbie trainer that supercharged a dozen Pikachu for a joint thunderbolt that exploded the Pokémon Center. That was why she'd been transferred out and over to Vermilion. But she'd vaguely followed his career ever since, noting his entries in various leagues and tournaments. She'd felt an odd sort of sisterly pride whenever she heard he'd won something. And yet, despite the fact she knew he was a twice champion now, technically, neither Orange Islands or the brand new Alola League really counted. She suspected it hadn't occurred to her that he would have changed over the years. When she'd seen him on the street and warned him about Team Rocket, she hadn't recognized him. The Ash she remembered was an angry, impatient mess that was barely holding himself together. The boy on the street had been relaxed, easygoing, and had an aura of comfortable strength to him. It wasn't until he came into the station to hand in a stolen Cubone, providing his Rotom phone for identification, that she realized her little mess of a hero had grown up. She looked at his offsider, wondering if this was a mentor, student, or just a friend. He had the awkward air of someone trying very hard to look like they were in control of the situation. She saw it a lot with young Pokémon trainers. "You're working for Professor Cerise?" she prompted them both as she ran a search for lost Cubones. "That's right, Go," the offsider confirmed. "We're research fellows. It's our job to investigate all the mysteries Professor Cerise looks into." Ah, that explained some of it. Not why a champion was working for a scientist, but that wasn't really her business. "I heard about the institute. Can't say I really understood why they picked Vermilion City to work out of, though. They don't have a mystery and the closest one is what happened to the Viridian gym leader," she said absently. "And no one's bothered looking into that for a while now." Ash shifted slightly in recognition. "Really? They still haven't found him? Is Agatha still filling in?" "Agatha?" Go repeated. "Like the Elite Four member?" Jenny nodded absently, more focused on the search results. Cubones were lost fairly regularly, but not often stolen or surrendered. The league decided Kanto has enough gyms to cope without Viridian City, so they just closed it down. But a new leader qualified recently, which is why the new gym's being built here, she explained. I haven't met them yet, but it will be good to have another gym leader in town. Hopefully this one will be a little more active in the community. Wait, hold on, Go said, waving his hands. Elite Four member Agatha was in a gym? Gyms are for trainers trying to qualify for the league. How is that fair? What do you mean? Asked Ash, and Go stared at him. Elite Four members are champion-level trainers, he cried. You can't put them in charge of something like a gym. No one would ever be able to win a badge. Momentarily distracted from the search, Jenny raised an eyebrow. Viridian City has always been a difficult gym to pass. The challenge is expected. Besides, it's not like Agatha'd go all out on a rookie trainer, Ash added with a grin. Just like any gym leader, they take it easier on newer trainers. Jenny smirked. Giving away secrets? Or did a gym leader tell you that? He glanced at her, then laughed, rubbing the back of his head. I kinda figured it out on my own. It was pretty obvious when I saw Misty and Brock battling some people last year. Even against a proper battler, using Mega Evolution and everything, they were still holding back, he said, and then smiled at Go again. But it's not hard to tell. I mean, gym leaders are some of the strongest battlers in any region, but when you go up against M for a badge, you normally won't be facing their whole team, even if you get their strongest Pokémon. Agatha would have done the same thing. Go stared at him blankly. Misty and Brock? Who are Misty and Brock? Catching sight of a good result, Jenny didn't bother waiting for the Cantonian gym history. Alright, here we are. If we've got the right one, your Cubone belongs to a trainer from Cobalt City, she said. I'll send a message through to the local Jenny, but I'm going to need you to fill out a form for me before I can take custody of Cubone. Huh? How come? He asked, and she gave him the look such a question deserved. His friend was obviously new to the industry, but Ash was a champion. He should have known this stuff. No Pokeball, and registered as stolen, she reminded him. Not released, not surrendered, stolen. In order to return Cubone to legitimacy, we have to provide evidence of how it was recovered. Ash stared at her blankly, and she realized that maybe the mess of a trainer she remembered hadn't gone too far away. I need a formal record of how you came into possession of a stolen Cubone. But I already told you, he said blankly. We were battling Team Rocket, and... Yes, I know, she said, trying to bite back her impatience. This is just a form to make that statement official. He looked over his shoulder, to where Cubone, Pikachu, and the strange white rabbit Pokémon were annoying Growlithe. He frowned before coming back to her. Can't we just give Cubone back to its trainer? It's just a bit of paperwork, she said. Then I can take Cubone off your hands. But what if the trainer doesn't come? Well, then we'll have to decide what to do with it, she said blankly. We can release it, or you can catch it, if you like. Or we'll put out a call to the gym leaders, see if any of them want a Cubone. But it's unlikely, in cases like these, the trainer is usually more than happy to take their Pokémon back. Go looked at Ash sideways, but didn't say anything, while the champion himself visibly dithered. Are you sure I can't just take it straight to her? What? Go asked. You don't even know where she is. Cobalt City, he said. It's in Kanto, right? Probably not that far. Ash, it's Sunday afternoon. Professor Cerise and the others will be back at work tomorrow, he said. We'll have work to do. Besides, Jenny interrupted pointedly, this is a legal matter. Cubone was officially registered as stolen. Its registration is currently blocked. We have to go through legal channels to unblock it. And even if we didn't, victims of Team Rocket attacks rarely welcome strange trainers showing up on their doorsteps. Ash blinked at her, then twisted back around to look at Cubone again. He didn't look happy, but he eventually sighed and said, okay. Did you want to catch Cubone, or something? Ash jerked around, shocked at the idea. They had just stepped out of the police station, so he hadn't really been expecting any question, let alone that one. What are you talking about? Cubone already has a trainer that it loves a whole lot. That's not really the point, Go said with a weak laugh, before refocusing. You just seemed kinda upset about leaving it behind. He blinked, then lowered his eyes to the footpath for a moment before shrugging. He did feel bad about it. Part of him wanted to go back in, maybe ask to stay until they'd at least talk to the trainer. But he knew he couldn't. This wasn't a Pokémon Center, where you could just hang out. The police officers were busy, and they were in the way even just standing in the doorway. Come on, let's go home. While he turned away, Go hesitated, crouching down to Scorbunny's level. How about a ride? Ash glanced back, surprised, and Scorbunny audibly gasped. Score? Just this once, Go warned, but it didn't need any further prompting. It leapt up into his arms, and then scrambled up to try and mimic Pikachu's position on Ash's shoulder. With its longer limbs, it couldn't quite balance, so Go sighed and pulled it around to sit in his arms proper instead. With an adorably dopey grin, Scorbunny bunched its paws up under its chin and settled down, so Ash quickly turned away again to hide his and Pikachu's grins. Besides, he still hadn't answered Go's question. If he was really trying to be honest this time, Ash knew he needed to stop letting subjects drop just because they were kind of uncomfortable. Cubone's been through a lot, you know? Being stolen by Team Rocket, and made to fight, it was really scared. It just needs someone to be nice to it right now, and Officer Jenny's a really busy person. She won't have time to look after it properly. Look after it properly? Like how? Ash looked sideways, to where Go was cradling his Pokémon. Probably because he was a little scared of Team Rocket. The obvious probably wouldn't be appreciated. I just don't think it'd be very happy locked up in the police station for a few days. It's not a home, you know? I guess, he said. Once, Chloe's little brother got lost and the police found him. Professor Cerise was out of town on research, and Chloe's mom was at work, so it was hours before they could find her contact number. He said it was really boring. And at least he knew for sure someone would come, Ash pointed out. Cubone. I don't know if Cubone's so sure. Did it tell you that? Ash frowned. No. But it's obvious, isn't it? He rolled his eyes, smiling wryly. Maybe to you. It probably wasn't worth getting into another discussion about how actually, Pokémon totally had expressions, how can you not see their faces moving? He let the subject drop, instead trying to figure out what was really bothering him. It wasn't just leaving Cubone alone. It wasn't even dealing with Team Rocket, or knowing they were using those scary Pokeballs again. He was just a little freaked out, realizing how much legal stuff there was about stolen Pokémon. For as long as he'd been on his journey, he'd been fighting off Pokémon thieves and poachers. It was part of being a trainer, he figured. And he knew there were laws. He knew the difference between a surrendered Pokémon, when you lost a battle with a Pokémon as the stake, and a stolen Pokémon, who was just taken by someone. He knew some of the rules about gifting Pokémon, and that trading couldn't just be done by swapping Pokeballs. But he'd never really thought about it. The Pokédexes handled most of that. If Team Rocket ever actually took Pikachu, and he actually reported it to Officer Jenny, he wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. He wouldn't have been able to just go after Team Rocket himself, because even if he got Pikachu back, then he still would have had to go back to Officer Jenny and make it official. And it had been bad enough today, filling out that form. He hadn't understood a lot of it, but some of the wording made it sound like he had stolen Cubone from its trainer. Even though that trainer was just a thief who had taken it from the person Cubone really belonged to. It was kind of scary, realizing all this stuff that he never really thought about before. Somehow, it made the stuff he'd been dealing with for years suddenly seem bigger, heavier, more real. It actually made him wonder about some of the Pokémon he'd adopted over the years. It had never been a problem, mostly because he'd always thrown his own Pokeballs and they accepted the registration, but he'd never actually checked to make sure Charmander or Tepig had been released. He'd watched Paul releasing Chimchar, but it wasn't like he'd waited for the cooling off PRD or anything. Maybe he'd been breaking the rules all this time and never known. So much stuff he'd done over the years, he'd done because it felt right and nobody stopped him. Even when people told him he was wrong, he just argued back, and everyone kind of acted like he'd learn his lesson eventually. Sometimes he did, but it had never been about something like this. Just doing what felt right, not knowing what was right or wrong. Ash chewed the inside of his lip, thinking back to the two Cubone and the Marowak. And Omastar the other day. He'd thought they felt wrong. And it was only talking to Cubone, reminding it of its trainer, that it had started to feel right again. But was it right? Cubone had been hurting. It had hurt really bad. At least, he thought it did. It wasn't like he understood how he'd felt that. He didn't know Cubone. And it wasn't like a Riolu, projecting its aura out. Maybe he'd been the one projecting. Maybe he'd been the one upset about the battle. Maybe he just wanted a reason not to blame the Pokémon, a reason to not feel bad about technically winning a Pokémon in battle. Maybe he actually had stolen Cubone. First of all, it's not stealing, it's a legitimate win, Professor Cerise said firmly. Whether you agreed to the battle or not, Pokémon were at stake and you were entitled to claim a Pokémon when you won. Ash winced. Go had told the professor about the battle almost as soon as everyone arrived at work, immediately piquing everyone's interest. Now, he was busy recounting the battle to Ren and Krysa, providing a blow-by-blow recap, thankfully giving Ash time to speak to Professor Cerise alone. He needed to know whether he'd technically done the wrong thing. They were alone in Professor Cerise's office, just them and Pikachu. At first, Pikachu hadn't understood why Ash was so upset, but now it was sitting close to his stomach and nuzzling in silent comfort, reassuring him it thought he was being ridiculous. Which maybe he was, but sometimes human laws were kind of ridiculous. That didn't make them wrong. I've only ever battled with one of my Pokémon on the line, Ash said. I've never taken one from anyone else. Which is very nice of you, to forgive the debt, but that doesn't mean you couldn't have rightfully claimed something, the professor said. Just like, in this case, it was very nice of you to gift the claimed Pokémon to the trainer it was originally taken from. The only legally gray area is that a stolen Pokémon is supposed to be blocked from wagers. And since you didn't set the wager, that's not your responsibility. He relaxed a little, nodding slowly. That kind of made sense. It's just the form sounded. Legal forms often do, he said. What you'll come to discover, Ash, is that governments tend to make things complicated to stop people from doing things on a whim. The harder something is, the less likely you are to want to do it, after all. He laughed, lifting his free hand to rub the back of his neck. I don't know about that. Normally I really like a challenge. So do I, come to think of it, Professor Cerise said with a chuckle, sitting back in his chair. They make life more interesting, don't you think? Yeah, but I think I would have liked to skip this one. He nodded, but his smile faded the longer he looked at Ash, considering. Back to your concerns? I'm not sure you were actually projecting, as you called it. Tell me more about this Pokeball the thief was using. Huh? Oh, yeah, I've seen them before, but it was a long time ago, he said, glancing back down at Pikachu for confirmation. Back in Johto, remember? When we met Sammy. Pika, Pikachu agreed, and shivered. Pika Pikachu Pika. I know. Sorry, buddy, he said, rubbing his hand all the way from Pikachu's head to its tail before looking back up at the professor. If they're the same thing, they're really nasty. They can catch caught Pokémon, and you know how a Pokeball usually makes Pokémon all relaxed and calm and stuff. So the theory says, Professor Cerise said. These aren't like that. These Pokeballs hurt, he said, tensing up his muscles and shoulders to try and show the feeling. They hurt so bad that their minds just go blank, and all that's left is bad feelings. Again, Professor Cerise just gazed at him for a few moments, before standing up and pushing his chair out of the way to access the holoscreen behind his desk. Black and red design, you said? Yeah. Mostly black, it's just the seams that are red, he said. Kinda like the reverse of a cherish ball, if you've ever seen one of them. In a textbook, he said vaguely, pulling up a few images. Ash recognized most of them, though he couldn't exactly remember where he'd seen them. Some were black and white, with red RS, so he could guess it was from Team Rocket. Another was more purple, with white seams, but again with the R. The only one that looked close was actually a computer image, but Ash still pointed at it. That one. In the corner. Ah, the mythical Shadow Ball, he said, expanding the file. Mythical? Sorry, poor choice of words, he said, and stepped back to better reveal the mass of text and a few blurry photos. Mythical in the sense that it's never been officially registered, but there have been a few reports of it over the years. It's forbidden technology, of course. But the reports match what you're describing. Ash tried to read the text, but it was all too complicated and there was way too much of it, so he quickly shook his head to clear it and refocused on the professor. What do you mean, forbidden? Pokeballs are curious technology, still vaguely in the realm of the arcane, despite how much we know about them, he explained, shifting his weight onto one hip and folding one arm over his torso, the other elbow resting on it so he could tap his fist against his chin in thought. It's still assumed to be a kind of magic that allows Pokémon to be housed inside it, because we don't really know how the science works, and we've never been able to replicate it with a human. It's something specific to Pokémon biology. Ash blinked, not understanding what this had to do with something being forbidden. It didn't seem to be the same topic. It was Professor Oak who identified what it is about Pokeballs that make them such comforting housing for Pokémon, and allowed us to streamline the technology, the professor continued thoughtfully. By doing so, he enabled science to advance it, which is how we were able to build more specialized Pokeballs. We've learned to manipulate Pokémon's emotional energy through a Pokeball to better build relationships between Pokémon and trainer. Ash nodded slowly. He was very vaguely aware of how it worked, that was why you could catch a Pokémon and use it straight away. Okay, but while we currently use this manipulation in a positive way, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to use it in a negative fashion, he said. Which is where the Shadow Ball comes in. Where, for example, a Friend Ball will raise a Pokémon's emotional capacity for love and affection, a Shadow Ball is supposed to reduce it almost to the point of non-existence. Stop it from feeling love? Ash asked. No way. That's the theory, he said quietly, staring at the image for a long moment. I can only imagine how it must feel to lose that capacity. To not be able to feel anything but anger and hatred? It would be a terrible existence, but potentially very useful. Useful, he repeated furiously. How is that useful? The professor glanced back at him, apologetic and sad. War makes monsters of us all, Ash. He stared at him, refusing to believe it. He'd fought some terrible people, seen really horrible things done to people and Pokémon, but almost all of them had been doing it for something they believed in. Surely no one would do something so terrible just to, for what? What could be worth that? Thankfully, as I said, it's been outlawed as even a concept, Professor Cerise continued, turning to face him properly. But the law doesn't stop everyone. Honestly, I'm not surprised to hear an organization like Team Rocket has been continuing the technology. It worries me a great deal to think they may have made it stable enough to use in regular battle. We have to stop it, Ash said firmly. Of course. But the first step to doing that is understanding it. After all, at the moment we don't really know anything about these Shadow Ball, or their effects. You're the first person I've ever heard of to have been able to recognize it, he said, and sat back down, pulling his keyboard over so he could start taking notes. Let's start with the thief. You're sure he wasn't a particularly high-ranking member of Team Rocket? No way, he said, shaking his head. Those guys are always different, and they use way tougher Pokémon. Agents and stuff wouldn't use a Cubone. Alright. You said you could feel something when you looked at the Pokémon? Do you think you could describe it? Ash hesitated, his shoulders rising slightly. He still wasn't used to explaining things like this. It had always been fine with Professor Oak, who just accepted his vague statements and moved on, or Professor Kukui, who was happy to not understand as long as Ash felt okay about it. Not that he felt okay about this, but how was he supposed to explain it, anyway? It wasn't like Dynamaxing, or evolution energy, or anything where there was a specific thing. Like a pressure that he could describe. This was more like, it had been like, feelings. Really, really bad feelings. Even in his own head, it sounded stupid. Take your time, Ash, Professor Cerise prompted. Anything you can tell me will help, even if you don't know how. I don't know how to describe it, he said. It was kind of. I don't know. Pika? Pikachu asked, patting his chest encouragingly, and Ash sighed. Somehow, he didn't think Pikachu would be able to help explain. It felt cold, he said. And hard. Like running into a lead wall. There was a thing that's normally there, in everyone, but especially Pokémon, and it just wasn't there. Professor Cerise's eyebrows twitched slightly, but he didn't say anything, just waiting for Ash to continue. All I could feel was, they were angry. All the Pokémon were angry, and scared, and the thing wasn't there, he said, absently touching his torso just below his ribs. Maybe that's what the Shadow Ball took away. Maybe, Professor Cerise said softly, before turning to write some notes. Go said you managed to calm Cubone down. Did anything happen then? That's even weirder, he admitted. I wanted to help it. It was so scared, you know? It needed help. And when I touched it, I mean. The professor glanced at him again, and Ash winced. He didn't like talking about this. It was too hard. Before, I've met Riolu, and sometimes, There was this one Riolu that had special aura powers, he said, flicking his hand absently. When it got really upset, it sent out these, like feelings. Only I could see them. Memories, maybe? Only not like memories. More like flashes. Flashes of experience? I guess? He shook his head. Even at the time, he'd tried to explain it to Dawn and Brock, and they hadn't really been able to understand. It wasn't like he could see or hear or feel the things Riolu had shown him, but he'd known them, deep down. When I touched Cubone, it was like that. I got all these flashes of. I dunno. They were its mom, and its trainer, and then getting caught by Team Rocket, and I dunno how to explain it. But Professor Cerise was already staring at him again, his eyes wide behind his glasses. After a few moments, he coughed and looked away, blinking rapidly, before returning to Ash again. Could you tell me more about these flashes? Are they words, like with Lugia? Oh, no, he said, shaking his head. Lugia wasn't really words either, but it was different anyway. With Cubone, it was, like when with its trainer, I knew no she's really nice, he said, and then paused, closing his eyes to better remember. Warm. Kind. Scared. She smells like apple toffees. They met in a field, and it had been raining, but the sun was warm, somehow. He hesitated, then shook his head and opened his eyes again, knowing how dumb it all probably sounded. I knew she made Cubone feel safe, so I just wanted to remind it of her. I wanted it to remember how she made it feel. And then, when it remembered, the missing thing came back. And it was still scared, and kinda angry, but mostly it just missed its trainer. It wanted to go home. Pikachu said, leaning closer into his stomach, and he grimaced, petting it again. At least, that's what it felt like to me. The office fell quiet, and when Ash looked up again it was to find Professor Cerise staring at him again. He pulled back into his shoulders, wishing he was better at this stuff. I know it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. No, he said, but then jerked, blinking hard and visibly pulling himself back together. No, I mean, yes. It makes sense, it's just fascinating. You have such interesting abilities, Ash. It's really quite remarkable. He winced. I don't know if I'd call it an ability. No, I suppose you wouldn't, he said, and turned back to his notes. Let me just write some of that down. Tell me, you said this was different to how it was with Lugia, but similar to an experience you've had with a Riolu. Do you think that might be because they're different kinds of Pokémon? Lugia is a legendary, a more powerful Pokémon. There's reports of legendaries using telepathy with human language. Could that account for the difference? I don't think so. I think it was just different, you know? Lugia was trying to talk to me, Riolu and Cubone were just upset. Of course, yes, that's fascinating, he said again. What about you? Have you ever been tested for psychic ability? Aura sensitivity? Magical power? Not tested, he said awkwardly. I know I have aura. I don't know how to use it, though. Aura, he repeated softly. There's so few texts about it. Almost no one knows how it works, how it manifests in humans. You're such a mystery. Not really understanding, Ash laughed weakly, rubbing the back of his neck again. I kinda feel like I should apologize. Oh, no, we just agreed, a challenge just makes things more interesting, he said, and looked up at Ash with a warm smile. I know I've said it before, but I really am glad you decided to join us here at the Institute. I'm sure we'll uncover a lot of mysteries together. He blinked, then grinned, sinking into the relief. He'd been so worried that he'd done the wrong thing without realizing, but not only had Professor Cerise told him it was okay, Ash had actually tried to explain things and apparently gotten it kind of right. He never would have believed it. Maybe Professor Kukui was right. It was kind of hard, but honesty felt way better than talking around the truth. And it was kind of fun, thinking about how all this stuff worked. He was almost interested in finding out more about Aura now. Not quite, but almost. Do you think we'll be able to figure out how to stop the Shadow Ball, Professor? He asked, and Professor Cerise nodded. With enough research, there's no secret this world can hold from us. We'll figure it out, Ash. Pikachu cheered, and Ash pumped his fists, ready to take on the next challenge. They'd all work it out together. The orders, these last few years, had been a little strange. Part of it was financial. Team Rocket had tried a few big-budget schemes recently, and none of them had panned out. The ones in Kanto and Johto had been bad for Rocket Industries' reputation, while the Unova operation had not only been colossally expensive, but had ended with the boss injured and all their greatest technology compromised. Jesse's quick thinking and Kalos reporting on the events to a region-wide audience after the actual reporter ran scared had actually given them the perfect introduction to a market no longer filled by Team Flare. Rocket Industries had quickly established themselves as the new leaders in environmental research, while Team Rocket took control of the lesser crime syndicates with ease. That, James suggested, was why their Alola orders had been so vague. They'd had very few orders in Kalos aside from "Get that DMN Pikachu," but their changing plans and initiative had set Team Rocket up nicely. So Matori's resentful sneering aside, it wasn't that surprising they'd been given such free rein in Alola. Just go there and set up a base. Nothing else. Matori demanded regular reports, and the boss was almost always present in those calls, but rarely did he say anything or give them more orders. They were generally left to their own devices, and their lack of success was never commented on by anyone but Matori. But then, without any warning, they were brought home, for no apparent reason. Now things were even stranger. They had been given an actual base. They had semi-regular orders about where to go and what to do. They were even given temporary Pokémon to use in their missions. It was strange. So when James opened the door of their base to see one of Giovanni's specially picked spies smirking at him, the whole team braced themselves for weirder. "Oh, it's you, isn't it?" Jessie asked, leaning forward from her hips to eye the woman sauntering into their base. "Uno, or something?" "Mahjong," she corrected lazily, eyeing off the posters. "I love what you've done with the place. Very 1960s illegal pool hall. Needs more smoke though, you should pick up a few cigarettes." "It's a dirty habit," James said, folding his arms as he leaned against the wall behind her. "Besides, everyone knows why can't show smokin' on kids' cartoons no more," Meowth added. "It'd be a bad influence." That sounds like a you problem, Mahjong quipped, and Jessie scowled. Well, since this is our base, we deal with our problems. It's none of your business. What are you doing here, anyway? What do you want? Special orders from above, she said, now pacing along the cabinets to eye off James' various collectibles. Just checking in, you know how it is. How's your little side project going? Side project? Jessie repeated irritably. Yes, you know. That overpowered Pikachu you spent so many years chasing down, she said. You haven't mentioned it recently. You mean the Twerp's Pikachu? Meowth asked, while Jessie and James exchanged wary glances. They'd never made a secret of their interest in Pikachu, and over the years, somehow the boss had developed one too. Except his interest had never been direct. He'd just let them ramble, occasionally questioning about the Twerp and his training methods. It had reached a minor peak in Unova, of course, but that had more to do with Meloetta than the Twerp himself, and the boss had definitely known of the boy beforehand. They couldn't remember ever mentioning the Twerp's name, but he definitely knew it. It was strange. We haven't been going after it, James said slowly. The only time we've seen it since coming back to Kanto was when we were trying to catch those Bulbasaur and Ivysaur. That's interesting, Mahjong said, even though she sounded incredibly bored by the information. Do you know what its trainer is doing in Kanto? Competing in the league, I assume. Why should we know? Jessie demanded. We've been a little busy, you know. It's not like we follow that Twerp around. Anymore, Meowth added lowly. Does the boss want us to find out? Asked James, but Mahjong hummed vaguely. No. No, keep doing what you're doing. Whatever that is, she said, and finally turned to look at them with a benign smile, her hands laced behind her back. Tell me, how are you finding the Pokémon you're using? We've only had a couple so far, Jessie said. They were strong enough, I suppose. And they obey your orders? She asked, only to stop and chuckle lightly. Though, from all reports you've never had that problem, have you? You're quite remarkable trainers, despite all appearances. And what is that supposed to mean? Jessie demanded, while James narrowed his eyes. If we're going to be chasing the Twerp, we'll need stronger Pokémon, he advised. When he's retreading old ground, he tends to bring in older, more powerful Pokémon. He might not raise any younglings this time, and that will make battles even harder than usual. Mahjong glanced at him, but then smiled again, raising her eyebrows. Wherever did you get the idea you'll be chasing him? She asked. I hope you didn't take my question as a suggestion. You need to follow the orders you're given by Midori. Side projects shouldn't distract from your prime directive, after all. They exchanged glances again, not sure what the point of the conversation was. Team Rocket didn't bother with implied orders very often, but then Jessie, James, and Meowth didn't deal with the infiltration team very often either. Maybe Wobbuffet did, but who knew what Wobbuffet got up to when it was back at base? Even Meowth couldn't make sense of its vague statements sometimes. Oh, and while we're on the topic, I'm sure I don't need to tell you not to mention my visit to anyone, Mahjong commented, turning on her heel to head for the door. We operatives work best when no one knows our location. Including other Rocket members. You know how it is. James raised an eyebrow as she passed him. Is there someone specific we shouldn't mention this to? Don't make it sound so sordid, she said playfully. Just anyone you happen to speak to. Team Rocket has always appreciated your discretion. Wait a minute, that's it? Jessie demanded, storming after her. You show up, ask cryptic questions about Pikachu and then go? If you're all about secrecy and whatever, why bother coming here if it's not for anything important? I'm Mahjong. Every move I make has a purpose, she said, opening the door. Thank you for your time. And with that, she swung out into the hallway and disappeared. Jessie and James looked at each other again while Meowth stood up and joined them so they could all frown at the closed door. Something fishy's goin' on here, Meowth announced, and Wobbuffet swung its arm up in salute. Woo buffet. With the excitement of the race, they now knew why the boat ride to Sinnoh had been so jam-packed with casual Pokémon trainers, but most of them had stayed behind to party overnight, so the ride back was a lot quieter. Ash was sitting in the near-empty rear cabin, taking advantage of the solitude to comb the salt from Pikachu's fur where no one could get mad at him for the mess. If you're gonna start competing in these kinda races, we're really gonna have to work on your cross-country speed, he said cheerfully. You're not exactly built for swimming races, buddy. Pika, it cooed, obviously too blissed out from the comb to really care what he was saying. Ash chuckled, lifting his shoulders at the thought. As long as you don't start trying to enter sky races. You're a good swimmer, but I'm not sure even you can fly. Ooh, unless we tie balloons around you. How about that, buddy? Would you like that? Pika, it cheered, only to trail off into pleased mumbles as the comb pressed into the fur on its neck. Any further fantasies were cut off at the sound of footsteps, and Ash looked around to make sure it wasn't a porter come to tell him off for grooming his Pokémon on carpet. But it was just Go and Scorbunny, both of them carrying snacks. Dinner won't be for an hour or so, but I figured you'd be hungry, Go explained as he dropped a bag of bread rolls beside Ash's hip. Oh, wow, Go! You're the best. Thank you so much, he gasped, but grabbed Pikachu to keep it from lunging for the Pokepuff Scorbunny was carrying. Hey, hold on. We can eat after you're clean, okay? It pouted but settled down with nothing but a few mutinous grumbles, while Scorbunny gave it a smug look. Scorbunny. Pikachu, it grumbled back, scowling when Scorbunny took a large and pointed bite of one of the Pokepuffs. Since Pikachu was generally behaving, Ash ignored the exchange to instead watch Go sit down in front of them, wondering why he looked so excited. He was almost grinning. It was kinda busy before, but I figured we should debrief, he said, clutching his ankles to keep himself from bouncing. Ash blinked. Debrief? Talk about it. About the race? Or Piplup and Krogunk, he asked. They hadn't really settled into a rhythm about how they worked once the field stuff was done yet, but it seemed kind of strange to talk about their reports now. No. About how we battled together. For real, cried Go. Mantike and Scorbunny. I gave them orders and they did them and it worked perfectly. He blinked again, the memory of their fight with Team Rocket coming back a little slow, before he gasped and grinned. Hey, you're right. That was awesome, Go. Congratulations. It was great, wasn't it? It came so naturally, he said. It's nothing like it was in the Flute Cup. I knew Mantike's moves from the Pokédex, and I knew it'd be effective, so I just did it. And it was great. No need to charge it up with a status effect, and it just worked. It was so cool. Yeah. And you've only been partners for a few hours, he cheered. It was really great, Go, you'll be a top-tier battler in no time. Naturally, Go reveled in the praise, tilting his head up, eyes closed as he grandly touched his chest, practically sparkling as he said, well, when you catch such strong Pokémon like I do, there's no way you can lose for long. Ash tried not to laugh, instead looking back down at Pikachu's fur. He had been planning to do a thorough job, but it seemed kinda mean when there was a Pokepuff waiting. Besides, the salt hadn't really gotten deep enough to be really irritating. He decided to just finish up the tail and do everything else once they were back home. But while he shifted his attention, Go leaned over his ankles, shoulders up around his ears as he continued in more hushed tones. So those Team Rocket guys, they were the ones we met first, right? Those ones that called you twerp? What you think they were doing in Sinnoh? Who knows, he said absently. They show up all over the place. You blast M and they go away for a while, so who cares? But what about the Pokémon, he pushed. Aren't you worried? What if they were like Cubone? Like Cubone, he repeated, glancing up. You mean, hurt? Beartic and Machamp weren't hurting at all. Really? Wait, how could you tell? He hesitated, abruptly remembering that the wrongness hadn't been something anyone else had noticed. Go had just thought Cubone was mean. Of course he wouldn't have been able to tell these Pokémon were only attacking because they felt like following the order. But honestly, Ash would have been completely thrown and they had been like Cubone. Jesse and James were JRKS, but they were good to Pokémon. No way they let alone Meowth would have used Pokémon that had been tortured until they couldn't do anything but battle. They would have been just as upset as he was. That guy from before was different than these guys, he said. No way they'd use those Shadow Ball things. Different, huh? Go shifted back, glancing up at the ceiling to consider. You know, the internet doesn't actually say a lot about Team Rocket. I actually thought there was only the one group. How many are there? Group, he repeated. What you mean? Like, how many Team Rockets are there, he asked. Is it just the two? One's in black and one's in white? And Officer Jenny said something about higher-ups? He shrugged vaguely. It wasn't like he really knew how the team worked. He'd just heard references to agents and officers and he'd kind of gotten the impression Jesse and James had been big deals, once. He still didn't know what had happened there. There's loads of people in Team Rocket. They're all the same thing, just different kinds of people and stuff, all doing different kinds of work. But they're all bad guys, he said, and then paused, focusing on Pikachu's tail for a few moments before glancing up under his cap. Those guys today are bad, but all of Team Rocket is dangerous. Go hummed vaguely, tapping his fingers against his ankles as he thought about it. Assuming the conversation was over, Ash went back to Pikachu's tail, not wanting to delay the reward of the Pokepuff any more than necessary. Not that Pikachu seemed to care too much. The tail grooming was probably more than enough of a distraction. Pikachu tails were actually one of those weird things that Ash had kind of become curious about lately, spending so much time with people who researched Pokémon. They were different from most Pokémon tails, super hard, more bone than flesh or fur, and the angles made them hard to groom. And yet all Pikachu loved being petted on their tails. Pikachu never had any issue with how long Ash would have to spend getting dirt or in this case salt out of the curves and corners, because it was just more time gently scratching its tail. It must have felt amazing. Was that on purpose? Did Pikachu like people touching their tails because they were harder to groom? Or was it something about the electricity? Pikachu tails conducted electricity really well, so maybe it was something about all the nerves or, maybe he'd ask Professor Cerise about it one day. Pokémon were so interesting, he was actually starting to get kind of excited about. Are you scared of them? Huh? Ash looked up with a wide-eyed blink. Why would he be scared of Pikachu? Wait, them? Who them? But Go was still watching him seriously. Team Rocket. You don't seem scared when we deal with them, but the way you talk about them makes it sound like they're a way bigger deal than they've been so far. I was just wondering if maybe you were scared of what they could do. He blinked again, trying to backtrack to remember that yes, they had been talking about Team Rocket, and he frowned. Of course I'm scared of what they could do. They want to take away Pikachu. I don't ever want that. He finished up on the tail and knocked his knuckles against Pikachu's back to wake it up. You're done for now, we can finish up at home. Pie? Pikachu slowly twisted around to look at him, processed what he'd said, and then perked up. Pika. Pikachu. As it bounded over to take the Pokepuff Scorbunny was still kindly holding for it, Ash tucked away his comb and grabbed the rolls Go had brought. When he didn't say anything else, Go sighed irritably and loudly continued, but you stopped them so easy. You're a really strong battler, Ash. Gym leaders ask for your help. Those guys today were super weak, but the way you went against that guy with Cubone, or in the Flute Cup, they're never gonna be able to beat you. Ash made a face around the roll he was already munching on. He appreciated the compliment, but it was a pretty dumb thing to say. Of course they could beat him. No one was unbeatable. Not to mention, much as he hated to admit it, James was actually a really good battler when he could be bothered, and Meowth's mecha could be pretty scary sometimes. And Jessie had so much trust in all Pokémon that she was able to get some real incredible strength from them. Ash was used to them, and so it was easy to make fun of them, but he also knew that they could have been a lot scarier than some creep in an alley trying to steal from easy marks. Not that he was saying Go was vulnerable, or anything. Go was gonna be a really great trainer. Go was not aware he was even thinking this, so he should probably refocus on the actual question. What was the question? Was it a question? It was a bad point he had to argue. Right. They could. Anyone can get lucky, and Team Rocket is really good at hitting you when you don't expect, he said around a mouthful of bread. He swallowed to make sure his next point was clearer. And it's not just about that. They want to raise an army of Pokémon and take over the world. That's scary. Those two idiots today want to take over the world? He asked incredulously. Despite himself, Ash had to actually stop and think about that one. Because sometimes Jessie and James could be kind of hard to figure out. Even their motto could be confusing. Protect the world from devastation, but denounce the evils of truth and love? Ash didn't get it. A world without love sounded pretty devastating to him. But at the same time, not them, but all of Team Rocket. Their boss wants to rule the world. Why? He stared as he took another bite of roll. What do you mean, why? They're bad guys. That's what they do. Go sighed like Ash was being ridiculous and straightened up a little, raising a finger in point. There are billions of people on our world, Ash. Controlling all of them would be super hard. No one puts in that much effort for no reason, he insisted. So they've gotta have a motive, right? The internet just says they're criminals, but you actually deal with them. You talk to them enough that they have a nickname for you. You've gotta know why they do stuff. He paused, trying to remember whether he'd ever actually heard a real motive rant from Team Rocket. Money? That sounded vaguely familiar. Power? Sure. But what was power, to that boss guy? It was all pretty vague. They'd never implied they didn't actually like the world as it was now. They want more. More? Yeah. They want more, he said blankly. Because that was all it was, really. More what? Everything. Go stared at him, blinking rapidly, but he didn't have anything else. Team Rocket weren't trying to fix anything. They weren't trying to defeat anyone in particular. Except him, sometimes. They didn't care who knew about them, or how much money they had, or how many people or Pokémon were on their team. They just wanted more. It felt uncomfortably familiar, sometimes. That's so childish, Go said, only to frown, furrowing his brow as he looked off to the side. And actually, when you think about it, that is kind of scary. If they don't have a goal, then they'll never actually be satisfied. Even if they won, they just keep coming back. Ash stuffed the rest of his roll in his mouth and picked up another one. Food was easier than thinking about this stuff. But Go was still going, still considering. That means they'll never stop. No matter how many Pokémon they steal, or money, or anything, they'll just keep coming, until, wow. Wow. He absently reached out, pulling Scorbunny away from its conversation with Pikachu to sit it in his lap. Scorbunny blinked, but then blushed and grinned, snuggling in closer, while Pikachu just laughed and hopped closer so they could continue. Go barely noticed. I think I get it now. Even if they're no big deal to deal with, if we don't keep putting them down, wow. That's really scary. Yeah, but it's okay, Ash said, swallowing another mouthful to smile at him. Team Rocket might be really big, but there's way more good people in this world than bad. As long as that's true, you don't really need to worry about it. Go shifted back slightly, his shoulders dropping a little. But, not everyone can fight bad guys like us. What if? Not everyone can, but that's why things like the gyms and leagues are so important. To build strong bonds between people and Pokémon, and make incredible teams, he said, pumping the fist holding his current role. As long as there are good people in this world, and people willing to fight for them, then no matter how bad things get, everything will always be okay. Even when it's scary, and it seems nothing can ever go right, you just gotta remember, there are good people. And good always wins in the end. For a long time, Go just stared at him, his brow furrowed in a look that Ash couldn't quite read. It might have been annoyance, disgust, or disbelief. Or maybe it was just worry. But after almost a minute, it smoothed out into a strange, gentle smile. He squeezed Scorbunny a little closer and said, "Thanks, Ash. I like that idea. So, all things considered, what you lugs think?" Jessie heaved a deep breath, folding her arms up under her hair, and James tilted his head, tapping a finger against his cheek. They were floating on the remains of their Magikarp submarine, waiting for Pelipper to come back and pick up their used Pokeballs. They were whiling the time away by discussing why the twerp had made his way to Sinnoh of all places, apparently to enter his ridiculous Pikachu in a swimming race. There had been something about a Piplup, too, but honestly anything could provide a catalyst for twerpish adventures, so they had already disregarded that. It's all just so strange, don't you think? Jessie asked. Who skips regions for a day trip? And not even a serious one, James agreed. Not even the twerp brings a field rodent to a water race he wants to win. Wobbuffet confirmed, while Meowth hummed. Maybe it's got something to do with the new twerp. Could be a water-type trainer. Wouldn't be the first time the twerp's taken a newbie under his wing, so to speak. That twerp doesn't look like a water-type trainer to me, Jessie said dismissively. Lack of blue aside, that white bunny thing is a partner if I've ever seen one. And it's no water-type. Scorbunny, I think the Pokédex called it? James said lazily. As in Scorch? That's definitely some kind of fire-type. Hey, quiet down on the name puns, you'll ruin our Pokémon mystique. Meowth objected, but the humans ignored him, still gazing up at the sky. So perhaps he just came out for the Piplup, and the race was nothing but a distraction, James continued. Maybe he's just running cross-region errands for Professor Oak. Sounds like the sort of goody-two-shoes thing he'd do, drawled Jessie. She frowned, rolling onto her side to look at James. So what? He's given up on chasing leagues to become a full-time twerp? I don't think so. He paused, watching the clouds as he considered the possibility. Their twerp had always had certain heroic tendencies, wandering off the beaten path of a focused Pokémon trainer to indulge in prophecies, world-saving, and general do-goodery. The whole uniformed superhero team he joined in Alola had been far less surprising than it really should have been from your standard Pokémon trainer. And they were making a career out of general villainy, surely there must have been some kind of job in full-time heroics? But, no, it just didn't seem likely. Their twerp was far too in denial and much too stubborn to give up on his ridiculous dream and surrender to destiny like that. He must be doing something unusual, Jessie pointed out. Otherwise that bimbo Margarine. Mahjong, James corrected absently. Would never have come by asking about him, she said. Maybe there was something special about the Piplup. I don't think so, Meowth said, shaking his head. Seemed like your standard crazy jealous type teamie. So back to the new twerp, then? James suggested. They seemed a little excitable, some kind of sheltered royal he's providing bodyguard services to. If that's what passes for royalty these days, I'm glad to be a peasant, Jessie said with a flick of her wrist. Absolutely no style. Where's the velvet dress? The crown? No, my money's on the new twerp being some kind of nerd. The twerp attracts them almost as much as he attracts whiny little girls. And it would explain that frankly creepy level of interest they had in Meowth. Just 'cause you two don't appreciate my skills, Meowth grumbled, but James hummed his agreement. But if the new twerp is just another trainer, then why would the infiltration team be interested, he asked. And what is the twerp doing that sends him all the way to Sinnoh for errands? And do we really care? Asked Jessie. Who cares what he does as long as it provides us with opportunities to swipe Pikachu and any other ridiculous Pokémon he finds. Wobbuffet saluted, before pausing, its arm rising in quiet point as it added, Wobba. They paused, avoiding each other's gaze. They didn't care about the twerp. They didn't care what he was doing. They didn't care who else was interested in him. All they cared about was snatching his Pikachu, and then they'd probably keep chasing him around because the kid attracted rare Pokémon even when he wasn't playing superhero and skipping dimensions. But he was their twerp. If Giovanni was actually going after the twerp, he would have involved us, James pointed out. We know him better than anyone. Not even Matt Ori could have stopped that. She'd try, Jessie said, frowning. You know, I never did trust that four-eyed toad woman. I bet she has some nasty schemes in mind. Schemes the boss doesn't even know about. That would explain why Mahjong didn't want us talking to no one, Meowth added. Maybe she's going behind the boss's back. That sneaky little snake. Jessie yelled, shoving herself to her feet. Well, that settles that, then. Settles what? James asked blankly, and Jessie clenched her fists. We're going to find out what she's planning, she announced. We'll find out, and on the extremely off chance that it's actually a good idea, then we're going to pull it off before she can. And present the boss with all the spoils. Meowth agreed, jumping up too. We'll be the villains of the hour. James blinked at them both, not following, but then shrugged philosophically. At the very least, they could find out what was going on. Contrary to what she might tell him herself, there were very few people Misty trusted more than Ash Ketchum. It was something that had happened slowly. Anger had turned to fascination, and then a tentative friendship turned to something deeper than she'd ever felt before. But even though she knew Ash had changed over the years, she still clung to that relationship they'd had in the beginning. He was stronger and more reliable now, but a big part of her still wanted him to be that lost little boy that desperately needed her support. Which was just one of the reasons why it hurt to admit she actually needed his help. Let's get one thing straight, Ash Ketchum, she said roughly, while he blinked at her over the telephone line. I'm not asking for help. I am perfectly capable of handling this on my own. As expected, all those years of kindness and understanding instantly melted away, and Ash settled his weight back in the chair with a smug grin. He even folded his arms over his chest as he asked, Yeah? So why were you calling me then? Because it's more efficient, she said, and turned her head away, nose in the air. I'm a busy girl, I don't have time for this kind of thing anymore. It's a waste of my time. She looked at the screen from the corner of her eye, hoping her arrogance was beating out his smugness. But you're never doing anything useful, so it makes more sense for you to do it. Hey! I have a job now, he snapped, unfolding his arms to instead slam his fist on the desk next to Pikachu, who was rolling its eyes at the pair of them. Helping Professor Cerise is super important. We do all kinds of research. Oh, please. You just got through telling me how your super important research led you to a Cyndaquil riding a Fiero, she scoffed. She had been incredibly touched to hear the whole story, of course, where Ash had once again helped someone remember their passion and hope, but it was more fun to make Ash's shoulders rise in petulant anger. We were looking into sightings of Ho-Oh. It could have been the real thing. It could have been a total breakthrough of science. But it wasn't, she said, and turned her head just enough to gift him with a smirk. But don't you worry, I'm not actually going to pull you away from your super important research of papier-mâché. He was boiling now, and Pikachu sighed in resigned amusement. It had always seen a lot more humor in their arguments than either of them. Misty lifted a hand to her jaw to complete the arrogant, careless image, ensuring Ash wouldn't really pay a lot of attention to what she was saying until it mattered. I heard from May that you left one of your Pokémon with her father recently, to help guard against troublemakers in his gym, she said. I decided you might as well do the same for me. Pikachu blinked, humor immediately lost as it no doubt heard what Ash was too angry to notice. He, thankfully, only scowled more heavily. And why would I want to do something like that? Well, it's a waste of all that talent, having your Pokémon hang around Oak Ranch all bored, she said. You never give Kingler any exercise. It would be much better for it to stay with me for a while. Ha! He barked, and refolded his arms with a huff. No way. My Pokémon are always training hard with each other on Oak Ranch. I'm not letting you ruin all Kingler's good work by having it laze around with your fish. Ugh. She'd played it too far. So she huffed and turned back to face him again. Honestly, Ash Ketchum, don't you listen? You loaned Sceptile to May's dad. I'm just asking the same of Kingler. That's totally different, he cried. People are bothering Norman's Pokémon. Sceptile's there to protect them. And Kingler can protect my Pokémon, she snapped, and Ash very nearly shot something back before the words apparently processed and he froze. She could almost see realization dawning on his face, so she quickly turned her head away again, trying to recapture her careless arrogance. Like I said, I'm not asking you for help. I could totally take care of this on my own, but I can't just wait around for idiots who don't even have the decency to show up on a regular schedule. I just need a Pokémon that's strong enough and has the time to waste on guard duty. That's all. Pikachu said softly, while Ash settled into his determined face. She turned her head further away to avoid it, because she was not going to be worried about. This is such a pain. If my sisters were actually any use they'd be taking care of this, she said. Daisy at least. But they're all so focused on their shows, like I don't already have to take care of all their finances and marketing. I mean, Brock is helping out Forrest, and he's only one person, and he's studying to become a doctor. My sisters are so useless. It was important to complain about the non-important things. It softened the blow. Because she didn't want him to hear how scared she was. She didn't want to tell him that all the gym leaders from Kanto to Hoenn were having similar weird experiences. Broken fences, crumbling walls, tired Pokémon and strange coincidences. Because as dense as he was, and as much as she liked to tease him, Ash wasn't stupid. And she didn't want him to realize what they were all beginning to suspect: Team Rocket were organizing and building up again. If he realized that, he'd want to do something about it. But the thing was, Team Rocket wasn't Ash's problem. Jesse and James, sure, but not the real Team Rocket. They were a big criminal organization, not the responsibility of a single trainer that currently wasn't even signed on to the league. It wasn't Ash's job to take care of things like this. It wasn't his responsibility to save people. He was just a dumb, irresponsible guy with too much heart and not enough sense. It hurt to even pull him in this much. Okay, Misty. She blinked, and then turned her gaze to look at him from the corner of her eye. Ash wasn't smiling. He didn't ask any questions. He just met her gaze stoically and said, I'll go back to Pallet tonight and drop Kingler off tomorrow morning. Her fingers curled into her arm, nails biting against the skin. It was what she'd wanted. But she still hated it. Thank you, Ash. Although Go had awkwardly offered to come with him, Ash decided to take the round trip to Pallet and Cerulean alone. For one thing, Go had been pretty busy writing up notes on his new Pokémon and their illusory abilities. For another, while Ash was pretty sure the offer had been genuine, Go had been kind of nervous. They spent almost all their time together these days, but seeing his hometown seemed like a step Go wasn't quite ready to take. It was probably too personal. So Ash had only Pikachu for company as he rang the bell on Oak Labs. But it was weirdly comforting when it was Tracy to open the door and guide him through to the ranch. He hadn't realized how much he'd wanted to see a friend. Even if that friend did like to ask weird questions. So you're loaning out another Pokémon, huh? Do you think that you might start doing it professionally? Professionally, repeated Ash. What I mean? There are some trainers that raise Pokémon, and then let people hire them for work, he explained. Like Machamps for building, or how the Squirtle squad works for the fire department. Squirtle could be getting you a really solid income right now, you know. Ash blinked. I don't get it. Squirtle wanted to help its team. We want to help the professors and we still get paid for what we do, Tracy said, which didn't seem to have anything to do with anything, but then Tracy often made comments like that. Ash tried to keep up. What's that got to do with me getting money for what Squirtle does? As he opened the door to the ranch, Tracy glanced back at him with a smile. You know, Ash, one day you're gonna realize how much the world takes advantage of you. Pikachu laughed and said it was pretty unlikely, which was as good a sign as any that he was being made fun of. So Ash just scowled and let it go. He'd long since realized that trying to figure out why people were laughing at him only made them laugh more. How's everyone been? He asked instead. You haven't had any problems with Team Rocket, right? Nope. Just the usual arguments, he said. I'd be pretty amazed if someone did try and attack us, though. All of our Pokémon are from active trainers, and your team's really good at keeping everyone motivated for battle training. They'd be good at defending themselves. He smiled, but was quickly distracted by the light of a fire on the far side of the field. He couldn't quite see, but the distinct orange coloring told him it was a collection of fire types, and Pikachu perking up on his shoulder confirmed the feeling he had in his chest. His Charizard and Pignite were trading flamethrowers. You wanna go say hi for me? He asked Pikachu, who glanced at him before grinning. Pika, it confirmed, and then bounced off his outstretched arm to take off at a run. Ash and Tracy watched it disappear into the crowd before carrying on toward the lake, though Tracy glanced at Ash as they walked. Are you sure you don't want to take any other Pokémon with you? It's not like it'd be a long trip if you needed to switch them out. For a couple of moments, Ash considered it, weighing things up in his head. Unless Professor Cerise sent him to one, it wasn't like he was traveling in a new region to meet a lot of new friends, and if he was really being honest, he wasn't really interested in building a new team like normal. With all the weird stuff that was going on, it would probably be a good idea to have some of his stronger Pokémon around. But the same part of him that always made him leave his old teams behind, encouraged him to form new teams from scratch, forced him to experiment with new styles in Unova, and allowed newbie trainers to travel alongside him told him not to. Maybe it was because even though it wasn't a new region he was trying something new again. Maybe he and Pikachu wanted to be really open to new things. Or maybe he just wanted to support Go, learning about new friends from the start. Whatever it was, he was happy to just keep 5 empty Pokeballs on his belt, ready for whatever happened. He shook his head. As long as everyone's still happy here, then they might as well stay, he said. No one's been bored or anything, right? Well, Tracy said dryly, I can't say any of your Pokémon have told me so. Which was reassuring right up until Ash remembered that Tracy liked those kind of jokes, and he probably meant exactly what he said. He gave him a deadpan look in return. Haha. You know what I mean. Everyone's happy? They seem to be, he said with a grin. But I bet they'd all love to travel with you again if you wanted to take them. I dunno. It's not like I'm in a competition or anything, he said. I think most of my Pokémon be bored traveling with me right now. I don't know if traveling with you could ever really be boring, Ash. He grinned, but didn't bother answering as they reached the lake. Surprisingly, the first of Ash's Pokémon that they saw was actually Bysel, jumping up from where it had been sunbathing on the surrounding rocks. Hey Bysel! Ash greeted as it bounded over to circle between his legs, sniffing at his bare ankles before coming up to stand in front of him, arms crossed, with a triumphant smile. Bweze, it replied, then tilted its head, looking him up and down again. Byselbell? He smiled, setting one hand on his hip. He always kind of liked it when his other Pokémon asked after Pikachu. It felt reassuring, somehow. Pikachu went to say hi to Charizard and Pignite. How are you doing? It nodded once and explained it was doing great, and had been focusing on its speed and ice abilities. It offered to show him, and Ash very nearly agreed before remembering he was kind of on a schedule. He hadn't called ahead, and his mom would be super ticked if he came home unannounced after she'd already started cooking dinner. Something wrong, Ash? Tracy asked, and he looked up to see he was getting an apprehensive look. He laughed. No, I was just thinking about whether I'd have time to get some training in with Bysel, he explained as he stood up. Do you think Professor Oak would mind if I came back after dinner? Mom'll be mad if I don't get to the house soon, but Bysel's looking so cool. I'd love to see how it's doing. Buizel, it said proudly, and Tracy shrugged. I'll let him know, he'll probably call you if it's not okay. Ash smiled down at Bysel, who unfolded its arms to instead prop them on its hips with a satisfied nod. Beezabui, Byselbui. It's a deal, he agreed, but then added, in the meantime, can you get Kingler out of the lake for me? I want to talk to it about something. Bysel, it agreed, and even though they were at least 2 meters from the lakeside, it turned and leapt up, arcing over the rocks to dive straight into the lake. Ash chuckled again. Show off. Tracy smiled, but when he turned to look at him, he had one of those appraising looks again, eyebrows raised as he peered down his nose. So how are you doing, Ash? Being a research fellow must be pretty different. Actually, it's kinda not, he said honestly, shifting his weight back on his leg. Professor Cerise tells us where to go, and we've got stuff we're actually supposed to do, but a lot of what we've been doing so far is just going places and checking stuff out. Then we come back to the lab and tell everyone what we saw. Tracy nodded slowly. That's it? Uh-huh. We take a lot of photos, and Go likes to write a whole bunch of stuff down, but I don't have to, he said. I was kinda worried I wasn't doing enough, but Professor Cerise says I am. He says I have a unique perspective. I don't know what he means, since I'm not doing anything Go isn't, but I guess it doesn't matter so long as it's okay with him. He hummed thoughtfully, but any further conversation was cut off as Bysel leapt back out of the water to land, proud and just a little bit too flashy, on the rocks. Ash had just turned to watch Kingler emerge when he was blasted by a torrent of ice-hard bubbles ramming into his face. Still small, confirming it was definitely still bubble, not bubble beam. But it was also more like hail than the bouncy, elastic bubbles someone might have expected from a crab. Whatever it was, the attack was still strong and fast enough that he was knocked right off his feet, with enough condensed water that his hat and hair were soaked through in less than a second. He sat up, shaking his head to clear it, and blinked at his attacker. Kingler was hovering at the edge of the lake, most of its body still submerged with its larger claw playfully snapping at the water as it waited for his verdict. He grinned. That was awesome. Wow, Kingler. You must have been training so hard. He heard Tracy audibly sigh in amusement, but Ash didn't care about that. He was way too proud to care what even his friends thought. For a long time now, Ash had kind of avoided telling his mother about some stuff. It wasn't that he lied. He didn't even hide the truth. He just didn't bring up certain topics, and she didn't ask about them, and they both just pretended that there was nothing else going on. But she asked why Misty would want to borrow Kingler, and he didn't like to lie to his mom, so he told her what was going on. Their dinner conversation got a lot more awkward and stilted after that. You know, I used to tell my mom everything, he said to Pikachu as they wandered back through the empty streets toward the ranch. Now, Professor Kukui would probably say she's one of the first people I need to work on talking to more. Pika-chu, Pikachu suggested, and he grimaced. It didn't feel easy. But before he could start thinking too hard about why, Pikachu abruptly stopped, ears and tail lifting as it turned to look down the side street. Pika! Ash blinked and tilted his head to check what had caught his best friend's attention. His brow furrowed as he realized it was a girl. She was young, maybe a little older than him, with two massive ringlets of differently colored hair on either side of her head. Weirdest of all, he didn't recognize her. Pallet was a small town, and his mom's restaurant was right in the middle of everything. Even with his terrible memory, and how much time he'd spent away from home lately, he still couldn't avoid knowing literally everyone in Pallet's name, job, and family. There wasn't a Pokémon Center or even a park, so unless they were visiting someone specifically, strangers usually left long before dark so they didn't get in trouble for setting up camp on private property. But sunset had been an hour ago, and this was a stranger. She was dressed in traveling clothes, but had no backpack. She was leaning against the Milner's fence. She was staring right back at him, and he was pretty sure that was a smartphone pointed in his direction. He said, hesitating, then took a step toward her. Hi. Are you new in town? She smiled and lowered the phone, tucking it into a pocket as she pushed off the fence. She didn't say a word as she walked down the street and away from him. All too soon, she disappeared into the darkness. Pika? Pikachu asked quietly, and Ash met its worried glance with his own. That happened, right? He asked, pointing in the direction she'd gone. I didn't just imagine that girl? Pika. It was weird. He was almost tempted to follow her. But a much larger, less familiar part told him not to. He hesitated, then leaned down, extending an arm to his partner. Let's get going, buddy. It was pretty easy to forget the girl once he got to the ranch and discovered Bysel hadn't exactly kept Ash's promise to help with training to itself. He was greeted by all of his excited Pokémon, even the ones that didn't usually battle, pushing their way forward for hugs and attention. He laughed and tried his best to greet them all, even managing to get through all of the Tauros, but he knew that if they really wanted to train, he would have to be finished before 9. He'd had more than a couple of Professor Oak's neighbors yell at him for late-night training sessions before. So he compromised with everyone by setting out the rules of 3 3-on-3 battles. The Tauros were always just happy to cheer on their herd leader, and while some of them made a good show of looking disappointed, a few of them seemed relieved that they would be able to skip the training session. Levany didn't even bother pretending to be upset, proudly proclaiming itself retired and immediately weaving Totodile a pair of pom-poms that it took to with gusto. Ash had to stop himself from laughing as it began trying to convince Scraggy to join a cheerleading dance. But while it had seemed like a good idea at the time, once they got started, Ash quickly remembered why he usually only trained 2-on-2 at most. Keeping track of 6 Pokémon at a time was hard, let alone trying to direct all of them, and especially when most of them hadn't ever had to work together. Considering that most of his battles lately had barely been 2-on-2 in 2-round combat, it was a bit of a difficulty spike. Barrel roll, Staraptor. You can dodge faster without sacrificing your location, he yelled up at it, because it absolutely could have avoided Charizard's flamethrower better than it had by diving out of the way. But he couldn't focus on that, because Boldore wasn't moving either. Donphan. Roll out. Boldore, try to catch it with Flash Cannon. Glalie, get up in the air and use Icy Wind. Charizard, try and catch it for a flaming seismic toss. Pikachu! Pikachu yelled, leaping around impatiently. Not that Ash could blame it, it had been a long time since he'd tried to battle with this many Pokémon and everyone's teamwork was rusty at best. Corphish, intercept with Bubble Beam. Staraptor, blow that out of the way with Aerial Ace. Tighter circles, Donphan. Honestly, by the time the third battle was done, Ash was more than a little exhausted. But even so, he grinned at his team broadly, wishing he had more time to spend with them. That was amazing. I'm so proud of all of you. Bayleaf yelled, and immediately threw itself at him. He yelped, not having been ready to hold it up, especially when Noivern glomped onto his other side, almost immediately followed by Oshawott, Gibble, and Glisker all clambering in for a spot. Completely covered in heavy Pokémon, Ash crashed to the ground on a painful angle, but with all of his Pokémon snuggling in and cheering, he couldn't really do anything but laugh and hug them back as close as he could. He really did have the best team in the whole world. I was going to make you breakfast. How is it you wake up early when you're helping anyone but me and Professor Oak? His mother demanded, and the cafe erupted in laughter. Ash tried not to blush, but it was kind of hard with half the parents in Pallet teasing him over their morning coffee. Heading out again already, Ashy boy? Mr. Ariel asked playfully. Such a responsible little salaryman. When did you get so grown up? You know, it feels like just yesterday you were running through the streets half-dressed, yelling about missing the school bus, Miss Caroline giggled. And now here you are, up at 7 a.m. and off to work. But still cute as a button. And half the height. Suddenly, Ash was glad he had let go stay behind. He didn't think he could have survived the embarrassment. Okay, so, we'll see you later, Mom. I'll tell Mimi you said hi. See you soon, honey. Bye-bye, Pikachu, she added, but he had only just opened the door when she called out again, holding up her spatula for attention. Ash honey? He paused, glancing back at her, and she hesitated. He saw her swallow, her eyes flicking over him, before she gave him a strained smile and nod. Please tell Misty to be careful. I worry. He blinked, then lowered his gaze and walked out with only another, bye, Mom. Normally, he would have walked to Cerulean, but he had promised to be back at the institute in the afternoon, so that meant a bus ride. But as he watched the fields turn into forests, he couldn't help thinking that maybe a walk would have been better. He would have needed to think about where he was going and keep an eye out for wild Pokémon. He wouldn't have had so much time to wonder when he and his mother had stopped talking to each other. It was such a dumb thing to think. He and his mom talked all the time. Even when he was halfway around the world, he made sure to call her every few weeks at least. Because if he didn't, then whenever he did call, he'd have to see the relief in her eyes as she realized that yes, he really was okay. That horrible look of relief was one of the reasons he didn't really tell her anything anymore. She had never really been overprotective like other moms. She'd never stopped him going outside to play, or forbidden him from going places. She'd yell at him to get down from trees or cliffs, but only if she actually saw him climbing them. More often than not, she actually encouraged his exploring habits, often asking him where he'd go to find new friends next, and laughing when she heard about his encounters with wild Pokémon. When he'd turned 10, she'd been just as excited as he was, talking about how great it would be once he was out there in the world. She'd wanted him to go out, learn who he wanted to be, grow up, grow stronger. But after a while, her enthusiasm dropped. Maybe it was because of his father, who never called or came home. Maybe she was lonely. Or maybe it was because it hadn't just been a quick one-year journey. He hadn't just learned some responsibility and come home, older and wiser. He'd learned enough to solidify his dreams, and decided he was a Pokémon trainer for life. That was when her goodbyes stopped being so playful, and started feeling heavier. She started asking him to call home more. She asked him to do his heroics a little closer to home. They both realized she missed him more than he missed her. And then, stuff started happening. Stuff that even Ash knew wasn't normal. Stuff that was a lot worse than climbing trees or scaling sheer stone walls. And not just Team Rocket, which she'd always rolled her eyes at and treated like a nuisance, but big stuff. He didn't really know why she'd stopped asking, but as he got off the bus and started down the walking track to the gym, he remembered why he'd stopped volunteering the information. It was the look. Sharp, angry eyes, a clenched jaw, and trembling lips. And the memory of that horrible argument they'd had, when he'd tried to so hard to explain that some risks were worth taking and she yelled at him that they weren't. It was the first time he'd known, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that his mother was wrong. Maybe he was reckless. But he wasn't irresponsible. And deep down, they both knew it. But it hurt her to admit it, and he never wanted to cause his mother any pain. But the silence felt like a gap that was slowly starting to widen. Eventually, they were going to have to bridge it. Ash knew that. He knew his mom knew that. He just didn't want to have the conversation to start it. Pika. He blinked out of his thoughts, glancing first at Pikachu and then around at the path ahead. Since it was a walking path, it had seemed safe enough to not pay attention, but there were two people in horribly familiar black uniforms standing in his way. He jerked back in shock, hand instinctively falling to his hip. Wah, Team Rocket? Oh ho! What do we have here? One of them, a guy who quickly turned to reveal the red R on his jacket, crowed. Up pretty early, aren't you? The other was female, with bright pink hair and a nasty smile. She tipped her cap as she turned to look at him. I think I recognize this kid. It's the one Arlo sent that message about. The one who messed up our plans in Vermilion? He asked. Huh. Well, we'll see how well it goes this time. Ash growled, spreading his feet for a better stance while Pikachu settled in at the ready in front of him. Look, I don't know what you crooks are up to, but you better get out of here. Quit messing with the Cerulean Gym. Oh, how cute. You're telling us what to do, the woman cackled, and pulled out one of those horrible black pokeballs. Let me give you some advice, kid, these waters are treacherous. Get ready to be shocked, the man added, lifting his own shadow ball. 2-on-1, huh? Ash asked, and unhooked Kingler's pokeball. Not this time. Kingler, I choose you. All three Pokémon materialized at once, and Ash grit his teeth against the horrible feeling emanating from the Rocket JRKS Electabuzz and Poliwag. They both hissed, and Pikachu and Kingler hunched, ready for the fight. Normally, Ash preferred to let his opponents go first, so he could size them up a little. But this was no fair fight, and the pain of the shadowed Pokémon made him twitchy. He threw out his arm in signal. Pikachu. Quick attack Electabuzz. Kingler, show these JRKS a real crabhammer. Poliwag, water, was as far as the female rocket got before Kingler's claw slammed into Poliwag. Hot, white, and wet, the powerful strike sent Poliwag crashing into the hard concrete path, knocked out before its trainer could even get to the final syllable. On the other side, Pikachu flickered out of sight, barely more than a white light as it sprinted behind Electabuzz, round to its far side, and then launched up into its unprotected flank. With a cry of pain, Electabuzz stumbled but didn't drop, and the male rocket flinched at the sudden movements but rallied in time to order an attack. Thunderwave, Electabuzz. Kingler, get out of there. Pikachu, dodge. Ash yelled as the other rocket sent out her next Pokémon. Poliwrath appeared standing over Poliwag's muddy body with a roar, beating its chest so hard that Ash could almost see ripples over its muscle. Electricity blanketed the Space Kingler had been as both it and Poliwrath leapt backward, and Ash shifted his stance to punch the air. Hyper Beam. Pikachu, keep them back with Iron Tail. Pika. Pikachu confirmed, ripping through the dissipating Thunderwave like it was nothing, tail shining and sparking in equal measures. The moment it was close enough, it tumbled through the air, striking Electabuzz dead center on its chest. That was finally enough, sending it careening backward, but the rocket just sneered and returned it before it could even hit the ground. Another Electabuzz almost immediately stood in its place. Thunder punch that rat, the man ordered, while the woman pointed a little more viciously. No pulled punches here. Hydro Pump, she cried, and both Pokémon lunged into furious attacks. Checking Kingler's energy charge, Ash swung his arm up, gesturing for Pikachu to move. Dodge and intercept, Pikachu. Iron Tail again. Pika, it acknowledged, leaping up over the punch to lightly balance on Electabuzz's forearm before launching off, tail still shining as it swung around, slicing the jet stream into two harmless arcs. Great work, now Electro-Ebb. Move, you stupid thing, the rocket woman yelled, and Poliwrath dove out of the way of the net while Electabuzz just tried to punch right through it. Instead, the electricity surged up and around its arm, spinning it off balance and down to be pinned against the dirt. It wasn't knocked out, but the male rocket sked and threw out a third ball anyway. Yet another Electabuzz materialized, but as angry as it was, it still paused to look around. When it saw the other Electabuzz, trapped under Pikachu's web, it roared, screaming so much pain and anger that Ash actually stumbled back, hands rising up near his head on instinct. He hated this. He hated those Shadow Ball so much. What's the matter, brat? You thought just because you got a few lucky shots in that we'd quit? The man jeered. Team Rocket never stops coming. Electabuzz, Thunder. Poliwrath, the woman ad, Pound. He hated them. He had to stop them. He had to. Pika. Pikachu called, and Ash flinched, glancing first at it, then over at Kingler. The Hyper Beam was ready, so he blinked hard to refocus and shoved his arm out toward Electabuzz. Switch partners. Kingler, go. Pikachu, Thunderbolt to the far right. Kinning, Kingler opened its claw, revealing the swirling mass of energy for a split second before it burst out and forward. Lar. Thank goodness it worked, the beam slammed out, shooting over the prone Electabuzz to crash into the final one so hard that it was knocked off its feet and into the male rocket. They both tumbled to the ground in a dazed heap, not quite out of the game, while Pikachu's Thunderbolt just barely managed to distract Poliwrath enough for its pound to go wide. It just missed Kingler, and Ash tried to take a second to pull himself together. He couldn't focus on these Pokemon's pain right now. Ugh. Just give up already, the woman yelled. Poliwrath, Body Slam. Poliwrath. Probably another Pokemon. And there were two Electabuzz that could possibly get up and fight again. All against his two Pokemon. Ash swung around, pointing at the male grunt and his current partner. Pikachu, Electro-Ebb those two. Kingler, show Poliwrath what you've got with Vice Grip. As Poliwrath ran forward, body bulking up in preparation, Kingler drew back its claw at the ready. Pikachu threw out its Electro-Ebb, pinning both Electabuzz and the male rocket to the ground beside the last one, and Ash tried to ignore another wave of frustration and anger. He didn't know what was going on, but he felt like he was panicking slightly, heart and mind unable to settle even as he tried to zero in on his partners. Luckily, they were in better shape than him. In its one massive claw, Kingler caught Poliwrath right around the middle and hefted it up overhead before slamming it down, hard, against the grass. It then squeezed, and Ash clenched his fist to keep himself grounded against another breathless wave of panic. Nice work. Now throw it, he ordered, and pumped his clenched fist. Pikachu, finish it off with Thunderbolt. Pika Pikachu, it yelled, perfectly timed so that Kingler had barely released Poliwrath before the electricity surrounded it. I'm not done, the woman cried, returning Poliwrath and pulling out another shadow ball that almost immediately revealed a Politoed. It, like Electabuzz before it, paused after coming out to stare at the fallen. It visibly balked at the sight of Poliwag, before looking up and around at Ash and his Pokémon with wild, furious eyes behind the shadow ball's red glow. The need for vengeance was so powerful that it made him flinch again, badly enough that Pikachu glanced back at him in concern. Pikapi? His Pokémon were counting on him. All the Pokémon here needed help. He needed to focus. You might not be done, but we sure are. Pikachu. Kingler. Let's give this everything we've got. The Rocket Woman sneered, turning to face Ash dead on. Politoed. Perish Song. Are you crazy? He yelped. He'd barely ever seen that command given. Perish Song was too risky, too dangerous. There were two still conscious Pokémon on her side that could both hear and get loose. But if Politoed realized any of that, it didn't care. It glared right at him as it opened its mouth to begin singing. P53-2'd. No, he yelled, and swung up both hands in a cross before whipping them bother out, refusing the battle. Crabhammer, Thunderbolt, let's go. King. Kingler agreed, scuttling forward with its claw already shining, while Pikachu leapt up into the air, slapping its cheeks at the ready. Ka. Kingler. Kingler's claw slammed into Politoed's head, but it didn't stop singing even as Kingler leapt back again, leaving Pikachu a clean shot. Move, the woman yelled, but too late, and not enough. Pikachu's Thunderbolt lashed out, striking the ground between her and her Pokémon. It erupted into an explosion, sending grass, dirt, and wind everywhere as Politoed's song turned into a scream. By the time the explosion settled, the screaming had stopped and Ash was only waiting to check out of habit. He knew Politoed was done. The Rocket Woman was hunched over, coughing helplessly as she tried to fan dust from her face. She wouldn't be able to do anything for a while. As expected, Politoed was knocked out, protectively curled over Poliwag even in unconsciousness. But the two Electabuzz were awake and spitting fury, making the other Rocket cringe back as best he could under the Electro-Ebb. He was probably closer to the brainwashed Pokémon than was safe. It was all, a lot. But the battle was over for now. Ash snatched out his Pokeball and returned Kingler, then scrambled forward, sliding to his knees in the broken concrete and grass over Politoed. Pikachu. Come on, he yelled as he hefted the frog over his shoulder. He scooped up Poliwag with the other arm, spared the two Electabuzz an apologetic glance that only made them angrier, and then surged up to barrel his way past the shocked Rocket. Let's go! He couldn't always save everyone. But he could get these two to Misty's gym.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.